The Crystal Stopper by Maurice Leblanc. Part 1. Chapter 1. The Arrests. The two boats fastened to the little pier that jutted out from the garden lay rocking in its shadow. Here and there lighted windows showed through the thick mist on the margins of the lake. The Enghien casino opposite blazed with light. Though it was late in the season, the end of September, a few stars appeared through the clouds. A light breeze ruffled the surface of the water. Arsène Lupin left the summer house where he was smoking a cigar and, bending forward at the end of the pier. "Growler?" he asked. "Masha, are you there?" A man rose from each of the boats, and one of them answered. "Yes, Governor. Get ready. I hear the car coming with Gilbert and Vautrin." He crossed the garden, walked round a house in process of construction, the scaffolding of which loomed overhead, and cautiously opened the door on the avenue de Cincha. He was not mistaken. A bright light flashed round the bend and a large, open motorcar drew up, whence sprang two men in greatcoats, with the collars turned up, and caps. It was Gilbert and Vautrin. Gilbert, a young fellow of 20 or 22, with an attractive cast of features and a supple and sinewy frame. Vautrin, older, shorter, with grizzled hair and a pale, sickly face. "Well," asked Lupin, "did you see him, the deputy?" "Yes, Governor," said Gilbert. "We saw him take the 7.40 tram for Paris, as we knew he would. Then we are free to act." "Absolutely. The Villa Marie-Thérèse is ours to do as we please with." The chauffeur had kept his seat. Lupin gave him his orders. "Don't wait here. It might attract attention. Be back at 9:30 exactly, in time to load the car unless the whole business falls through." "Why should it fall through?" observed Gilbert. The motor drove away, and Lupin, taking the road to the lake with his two companions, replied, "Why? Because I didn't prepare the plan. And, when I don't do a thing myself, I am only half confident." "Nonsense, Governor. I've been working with you for 3 years now. I'm beginning to know the ropes." "Yes, my lad, you're beginning," said Lupin, "and that's just why I'm afraid of blunders. Here, get in with me. And you, Vautrin, take the other boat. That's it. And now push off, boys, and make as little noise as you can." Growler and Masha, the two oarsmen, made straight for the opposite bank, a little to the left of the casino. They met a boat containing a couple locked in each other's arms, floating at random, and another in which a number of people were singing at the top of their voices. And that was all. Lupin shifted closer to his companion and said, under his breath, "Tell me, Gilbert, did you think of this job, or was it Vautrin's idea?" "Upon my word, I couldn't tell you. We've both of us been discussing it for weeks. The thing is, I don't trust Vautrin. He's a low ruffian when one gets to know him. I can't make out why I don't get rid of him." "Oh, Governor." Yes, I mean what I say. He's a dangerous fellow, to say nothing of the fact that he has some rather serious peccadillos on his conscience." He sat silent for a moment and continued. "So you're quite sure that you saw Daubrecq the deputy?" "Saw him with my own eyes, Governor. And you know that he has an appointment in Paris. He's going to the theatre." "Very well. But his servants have remained behind at the Enghien villa. The cook has been sent away. As for the valet, Leonard, who is Daubrecq's confidential man, he'll wait for his master in Paris. They can't get back from town before 1 o'clock in the morning." But what? "We must reckon with a possible freak of fancy on Daubrecq's part. A change of mind, an unexpected return, and so arrange to have everything finished and done within an hour." "And when did you get these details?" "This morning. Vautrin and I at once thought that it was a favorable moment. I selected the garden of the unfinished house which we have just left as the best place to start from, for the house is not watched at night. I sent for 2 mates to row the boats, and I telephoned to you. That's the whole story. Have you the keys?" "The keys of the front door. Is that the villa which I see from here, standing in its own grounds?" "Yes, the Villa Marie-Thérèse. And as the 2 others, with the gardens touching it on either side, have been unoccupied since this day week, we shall be able to remove what we please at our leisure. And I swear to you, Governor, it's well worth while." "The job's much too simple," mumbled Lupin. "No charm about it." They landed in a little creek whence rose a few stone steps, under cover of a mouldering roof. Lupin reflected that shipping the furniture would be easy work. But, suddenly, he said, "There are people at the villa." Look, a light. It's a gas jet, Governor. The light's not moving. The growler stayed by the boats, with instructions to keep watch, while the masher, the other rower, went to the gate on the Avenue de Cincha, and Lupin and his two companions crept in the shadow to the foot of the steps. Gilbert went up first. Groping in the dark, he inserted first the big door key and then the latch key. Both turned easily in their locks. The door opened and the three men walked in. A gas jet was flaring in the hall. "You see, Governor," said Gilbert. Yes, said Lupin, in a low voice. "But it seems to me that the light which I saw shining did not come from here. Where did it come from then?" "I can't say." "Is this the drawing room?" "No," replied Gilbert, who was not afraid to speak pretty loudly. "No. By way of precaution, he keeps everything on the first floor, in his bedroom and in the two rooms on either side of it." "And where is the staircase?" "On the right, behind the curtain." Lupin moved to the curtain and was drawing the hanging aside when, suddenly, at 4 steps on the left, a door opened and a head appeared, a pallid man's head, with terrified eyes. "Help! Murder!" shouted the man, and he rushed back into the room. "It's Leonard, the valet," cried Gilbert. "If he makes a fuss, I'll out him," growled Vautrin. "You'll jolly well do nothing of the sort. Do you hear, Vautrin?" said Lupin, peremptorily, and he darted off in pursuit of the servant. He first went through a dining room, where he saw a lamp still lit, with plates and a bottle around it, and he found Leonard at the further end of a pantry, making vain efforts to open the window. "Don't move, Sporty. No kid." "Ah, the brute!" He had thrown himself flat on the floor, on seeing Leonard raise his arm at him. 3 shots were fired in the dusk of the pantry, and then the valet came tumbling to the ground, seized by the legs by Lupin, who snatched his weapon from him and gripped him by the throat. "Get out, you dirty brute," he growled. "He very nearly did for me. Here, Vautrin, secure this gentleman." He threw the light of his pocket lantern on the servant's face and chuckled. "He's not a pretty gentleman either. You can't have a very clear conscience, Leonard. Besides, to play flunky to Daubrec the deputy. Have you finished, Vautrin? I don't want to hang about here forever." "There's no danger, Governor," said Gilbert. "Oh, really? So you think that shots can't be heard?" "Quite impossible. No matter. We must look sharp. Vautrin, take the lamp and let's go upstairs." He took Gilbert by the arm and, as he dragged him to the first floor, "You ass," he said, "is that the way you make inquiries? Wasn't I right to have my doubts? Look here, Governor, I couldn't know that he would change his mind and come back to dinner. One's got to know everything when one has the honor of breaking into people's houses. You numbskull. I'll remember you and Vautrin, a nice pair of gossoons." The sight of the furniture on the first floor pacified Lupin, and he started on his inventory with the satisfied air of a collector who has looked in to treat himself to a few works of art. "By jingo, there's not much of it. But what there is pucker. There's nothing the matter with this representative of the people in the question of taste. 4 Orbus and chairs. A bureau signed Perciafontaine, for a wager. 2 inlays by Gutierrez. A genuine Fragonard and a sham Natia which any American millionaire will swallow for the asking. In short, a fortune. And there are curmudgeons who pretend that there's nothing but faked stuff left. Dash it all, why don't they do as I do? They should look about." Gilbert and Vautrin, following Lupin's orders and instructions, at once proceeded methodically to remove the bulkier pieces. The first boat was filled in half an hour, and it was decided that the growler and the masher should go on ahead and begin to load the motorcar. Lupin went to see them start. On returning to the house, it struck him, as he passed through the hall, that he heard a voice in the pantry. He went there and found Leonard lying flat on his stomach, quite alone, with his hands tied behind his back. "So it's you growling, my confidential flunky? Don't get excited, it's almost finished. Only, if you make too much noise, you'll oblige us to take severer measures. Do you like pears? We might give you one, you know, a choke pear." As he went upstairs, he again heard the same sound and, stopping to listen, he caught these words, uttered in a hoarse, groaning voice, which came, beyond a doubt, from the pantry. "Help! Murder! Help! I shall be killed. Inform the commissary. The fellow's clean off his chump," muttered Lupin. "By Jove! To disturb the police at 9 o'clock in the evening. There's a notion for you. He set to work again. It took longer than he expected, for they discovered in the cupboards all sorts of valuable knickknacks which it would have been very wrong to disdain, and, on the other hand, Vautrin and Gilbert were going about their investigations with signs of labored concentration that nonplussed him. At long last, he lost his patience. "That will do," he said. "We're not going to spoil the whole job and keep the motor waiting for the sake of the few odd bits that remain. I'm taking the boat." They were now by the waterside and Lupin went down the steps. Gilbert held him back. "I say, Governor, we want one more look round 5 minutes. No longer." "But what for? Dash it all." "Well, it's like this. We were told of an old reliquary, something stunning. Well, we can't lay our hands on it. And I was thinking, there's a cupboard with a big lock to it in the pantry. You see, we can't very well." He was already on his way to the villa. Vautrin ran back too. "I'll give you 10 minutes, not a second longer," cried Lupin. "In 10 minutes, I'm off." But the 10 minutes passed and he was still waiting. He looked at his watch. 9:15, he said to himself. This is madness. And he also remembered that Gilbert and Vautrin had behaved rather queerly throughout the removal of the things, keeping close together and apparently watching each other. What could be happening? Lupin mechanically returned to the house, urged by a feeling of anxiety which he was unable to explain. And, at the same time, he listened to a dull sound which rose in the distance from the direction of Enghien, and which seemed to be coming nearer. People strolling about, no doubt. He gave a sharp whistle and then went to the main gate to take a glance down the avenue. But, suddenly, as he was opening the gate, a shot rang out, followed by a yell of pain. He returned at a run, went round the house, leapt up the steps and rushed to the dining room. Blast it all! What are you doing there, you two? Gilbert and Vautrin, locked in a furious embrace, were rolling on the floor, uttering cries of rage. Their clothes were dripping with blood. Lupin flew at them to separate them. But already Gilbert had got his adversary down and was wrenching out of his hands something which Lupin had no time to see. And Vautrin, who was losing blood through a wound in the shoulder, fainted. Who hurt him? You, Gilbert? Asked Lupin, furiously. No, Leonard. Leonard? Why, he was tied up. He undid his fastenings and got hold of his revolver. The scoundrel! Where is he? Lupin took the lamp and went into the pantry. The manservant was lying on his back, with his arms outstretched, a dagger stuck in his throat and a livid face. A red stream trickled from his mouth. Ah! Gasped Lupin, after examining him. He's dead. Do you think so? Do you think so? Stammered Gilbert, in a trembling voice. He's dead, I tell you. It was Vautrin. It was Vautrin who did it. Pale with anger, Lupin caught hold of him. It was Vautrin, was it? And you too, you blackguard, since you were there and didn't stop him. Blood! Blood! You know I won't have it. Well, it's a bad lookout for you, my fine fellows. You'll have to pay the damage, and you won't get off cheaply either. Mind the guillotine. And, shaking him violently, what was it? Why did he kill him? He wanted to go through his pockets and take the key of the cupboard from him. When he stooped over him, he saw that the man unloosed his arms. He got frightened, and he stabbed him. But the revolver shot. It was Leonard. He had his revolver in his hand. He just had strength to take aim before he died. And the key of the cupboard. Vautrin took it. Did he open it? And did he find what he was after? Yes. And you wanted to take the thing from him. What sort of thing was it? The reliquary? No, it was too small for that. Then what was it? Answer me, will you? Lupin gathered from Gilbert's silence and the determined expression on his face that he would not obtain a reply. With a threatening gesture, I'll make you talk, my man. Sure as my name's Lupin, you shall come out with it. But, for the moment, we must see about decamping. Here, help me. We must get Vautrin into the boat. They had returned to the dining room and Gilbert was bending over the wounded man, when Lupin stopped him. Listen. They exchanged one look of alarm. Someone was speaking in the pantry, a very low, strange, very distant voice. Nevertheless, as they at once made certain, there was no one in the room, no one except the dead man, whose dark outline lay stretched upon the floor. And the voice spake anew, by turns shrill, stifled, bleating, stammering, yelling, fearsome. It uttered indistinct words, broken syllables. Lupin felt the top of his head covering with perspiration. What was this incoherent voice, mysterious as a voice from beyond the grave? He had knelt down by the manservant's side. The voice was silent and then began again. "Give us a better light," he said to Gilbert. He was trembling a little, shaken with a nervous dread which he was unable to master, for there was no doubt possible. When Gilbert had removed the shade from the lamp, Lupin realized that the voice issued from the corpse itself, without a movement of the lifeless mass, without a quiver of the bleeding mouth. "Governor, I've got the shivers," stammered Gilbert. Again the same voice, the same snuffling whisper. Suddenly, Lupin burst out laughing, seized the corpse and pulled it aside. "Exactly," he said, catching sight of an object made of polished metal. "Exactly. That's it. Well, upon my word, it took me long enough." On the spot on the floor which he had uncovered lay the receiver of a telephone, the cord of which ran up to the apparatus fixed on the wall, at the usual height. Lupin put the receiver to his ear. The noise began again at once, but it was a mixed noise, made up of different calls, exclamations, confused cries, the noise produced by a number of persons questioning one another at the same time. "Are you there?" He won't answer. "It's awful. They must have killed him. What is it? Keep up your courage. There's help on the way, police, soldiers." "Dash it," said Lupin, dropping the receiver. The truth appeared to him in a terrifying vision. Quite at the beginning, while the things upstairs were being moved, Leonard, whose bonds were not securely fastened, had contrived to scramble to his feet, to unhook the receiver, probably with his teeth, to drop it and to appeal for assistance to the Engian telephone exchange. And those were the words which Lupin had overheard after the first boat started. "Help! Murder! I shall be killed!" And this was the reply of the exchange. The police were hurrying to the spot, and Lupin remembered the sounds which he had heard from the garden, 4 or 5 minutes earlier, at most. "The police! Take to your heels!" he shouted, darting across the dining room. "What about Vautrin?" asked Gilbert. "Sorry, can't be helped." But Vautrin, waking from his torpor, entreated him as he passed. "Governor, you wouldn't leave me like this." Lupin stopped, in spite of the danger, and was lifting the wounded man, with Gilbert's assistance, when a loud din arose outside. "Too late," he said. At that moment, blows shook the whole door at the back of the house. He ran to the front steps. A number of men had already turned the corner of the house at a rush. He might have managed to keep ahead of them, with Gilbert, and reach the waterside. But what chance was there of embarking and escaping under the enemy's fire? He locked and bolted the door. "We are surrounded, and done for," spluttered Gilbert. "Hold your tongue," said Lupin. "But they've seen us, Governor. They're knocking." "Hold your tongue," Lupin repeated. Not a word, not a movement. He himself remained unperturbed, with an utterly calm face and the pensive attitude of one who has all the time that he needs to examine a delicate situation from every point of view. He had reached one of those minutes which he called the superior moments of existence, those which alone give a value and a price to life. On such occasions, however threatening the danger, he always began by counting to himself, slowly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 until the beating of his heart became normal and regular. Then and not till then, he reflected, but with what intensity, with what perspicacity, with what a profound intuition of possibilities. All the factors of the problem were present in his mind. He foresaw everything. He admitted everything. And he took his resolution in all logic and in all certainty. After 30 or 40 seconds, while the men outside were banging at the doors and picking the locks, he said to his companion, "Follow me." Returning to the dining room, he softly opened the sash and drew the Venetian blinds of a window in the side wall. People were coming and going, rendering flight out of the question. Thereupon he began to shout with all his might, in a breathless voice, "This way! Help! I got them! This way!" He pointed his revolver and fired 2 shots into the treetops. Then he went back to Vautrin, bent over him and smeared his face and hands with a wounded man's blood. Lastly, turning upon Gilbert, he took him violently by the shoulders and threw him to the floor. "What do you want, Governor? There's a nice thing to do." "Let me do as I please," said Lupin, laying an imperative stress on every syllable. I'll answer for everything. I'll answer for the two of you. Let me do as I like with you. I'll get you both out of prison. But I can only do that if I'm free. Excited cries rose through the open window. This way, he shouted. I've got them. Help! And, quietly, in a whisper, just think for a moment. Have you anything to say to me? Something that can be of use to us? Gilbert was too much taken aback to understand Lupin's plan, and he struggled furiously. Vautrin showed more intelligence. Moreover, he had given up all hope of escape because of his wound, and he snarled. Let the governor have his way, you ass. As long as he gets off, isn't that the great thing? Suddenly, Lupin remembered the article which Gilbert had put in his pocket, after capturing it from Vautrin. He now tried to take it in his turn. No, not that. Not if I know it, growled Gilbert, managing to release himself. Lupin floored him once more. But two men suddenly appeared at the window, and Gilbert yielded and, handing the thing to Lupin, who pocketed it without looking at it, whispered, Here you are, Governor. I'll explain. You can be sure that. He did not have time to finish. Two policemen and others after them and soldiers who entered through every door and window came to Lupin's assistance. Gilbert was at once seized and firmly bound. Lupin withdrew. I'm glad you've come, he said. The beggar's given me a lot of trouble. I wounded the other, but this one. The commissary of police asked him, hurriedly, Have you seen the manservant? Have they killed him? I don't know, he answered. You don't know? Why, I came with you from Enghien, on hearing of the murder. Only, while you were going round the left of the house, I went round the right. There was a window open. I climbed up just as these two ruffians were about to jump down. I fired at this one, pointing to Vautrin, and seized hold of his pal. How could he have been suspected? He was covered with blood. He had handed over the valet's murderers. Half a score of people had witnessed the end of the heroic combat which he had delivered. Besides, the uproar was too great for anyone to take the trouble to argue or to waste time in entertaining doubts. In the height of the first confusion, the people of the neighborhood invaded the villa. One and all lost their heads. They ran to every side, upstairs, downstairs, to the very cellar. They asked one another questions, yelled and shouted, and no one dreamt of checking Lupin's statements, which sounded so plausible. However, the discovery of the body in the pantry restored the commissary to a sense of his responsibility. He issued orders, had the house cleared and placed policemen at the gate to prevent anyone from passing in or out. Then, without further delay, he examined the spot and began his inquiry. Vautrin gave his name. Gilbert refused to give his, on the plea that he would only speak in the presence of a lawyer. But, when he was accused of the murder, he informed against Vautrin, who defended himself by denouncing the other, and the two of them vociferated at the same time, with the evident wish to monopolize the commissary's attention. When the commissary turned to Lupin to request his evidence, he perceived that the stranger was no longer there. Without the least suspicion, he said to one of the policemen, Go and tell that gentleman that I should like to ask him a few questions. They looked about for the gentleman. Someone had seen him standing on the steps, lighting a cigarette. The next news was that he had given cigarettes to a group of soldiers and strolled toward the lake, saying that they were to call him if he was wanted. They called him. No one replied, but a soldier came running up. The gentleman had just got into a boat and was rowing away for all he was worth. The commissary looked at Gilbert and realized that he had been tricked. Stop him, he shouted. Fire on him. He's an accomplice. He himself rushed out, followed by two policemen, while the others remained with the prisoners. On reaching the bank, he saw the gentleman, 100 yards away, taking off his hat to him in the dusk. One of the policemen discharged his revolver, without thinking. The wind carried the sound of words across the water. The gentleman was singing as he rowed. Go, little bark, float in the dark. But the commissary saw a skiff fastened to the landing stage of the adjoining property. He scrambled over the hedge separating the two gardens and, after ordering the soldiers to watch the banks of the lake and to seize the fugitive if he tried to put ashore, the commissary and two of his men pulled off in pursuit of Lupin. It was not a difficult matter, for they were able to follow his movements by the intermittent light of the moon and to see that he was trying to cross the lakes while bearing toward the right, that is to say, toward the village of St. Gratien. Moreover, the commissary soon perceived that, With the aid of his men and thanks perhaps to the comparative lightness of his craft, he was rapidly gaining on the other. In 10 minutes he had decreased the interval between them by 1/2. "That's it," he cried. "We shan't even need the soldiers to keep him from landing. I very much want to make the fellow's acquaintance. He's a cool hand and no mistake." The funny thing was that the distance was now diminishing at an abnormal rate, as though the fugitive had lost heart at realizing the futility of the struggle. The policemen redoubled their efforts. The boat shot across the water with the swiftness of a swallow. Another 100 yards at most, and they would reach the man. "Halt!" cried the commissary. The enemy, whose huddled shape they could make out in the boat, no longer moved. The sculls drifted with the stream, and this absence of all motion had something alarming about it. A ruffian of that stamp might easily lie in wait for his aggressors, sell his life dearly, and even shoot them dead before they had a chance of attacking him. "Surrender!" shouted the commissary. The sky, at that moment, was dark. The 3 men lay flat at the bottom of their skiff, for they thought they perceived a threatening gesture. The boat, carried by its own impetus, was approaching the other. The commissary growled, "We won't let ourselves be sniped. Let's fire at him. Are you ready?" And he roared, once more, "Surrender, if not." No reply. The enemy did not budge. "Surrender! Hands up! You refuse. So much the worse for you. I'm counting. 1, 2. The policemen did not wait for the word of command. They fired and, at once, bending over their oars, gave the boat so powerful an impulse that it reached the goal in a few strokes. The commissary watched, revolver in hand, ready for the least movement. He raised his arm. "If you stir, I'll blow out your brains." But the enemy did not stir for a moment, and, when the boat was bumped and the 2 men, letting go their oars, prepared for the formidable assault, the commissary understood the reason of this passive attitude. There was no one in the boat. The enemy had escaped by swimming, leaving in the hands of the victor a certain number of the stolen articles, which, heaped up and surmounted by a jacket and a bowler hat, might be taken, at a pinch, in the semi-darkness, vaguely to represent the figure of a man. They struck matches and examined the enemy's cast clothes. There were no initials in the hat. The jacket contained neither papers nor pocketbook. Nevertheless, they made a discovery which was destined to give the case no little celebrity and which had a terrible influence on the fate of Gilbert and Vautrin. In one of the pockets was a visiting card which the fugitive had left behind, the card of Arsène Lupin. At almost the same moment, while the police, towing the captured skiff behind them, continued their empty search, and while the soldiers stood drawn up on the bank, straining their eyes to try and follow the fortunes of the naval combat, the aforesaid Arsène Lupin was quietly landing at the very spot which he had left 2 hours earlier. He was there met by his 2 other accomplices, the Growler and the Masher, flung them a few sentences by way of explanation, jumped into the motorcar, among Daubrecq the deputy's armchairs and other valuables, wrapped himself in his furs and drove, by deserted roads, to his repository at Neuilly, where he left the chauffeur. A taxicab brought him back to Paris and put him down by the church of Saint-Philippe de Roule, not far from which, in the Rue Matignon, he had a flat, on the entresol floor, of which none of his gang, excepting Gilbert, knew, a flat with a private entrance. He was glad to take off his clothes and rub himself down, for, in spite of his strong constitution, he felt chilled to the bone. On retiring to bed, he emptied the contents of his pockets, as usual, on the mantelpiece. It was not till then that he noticed, near his pocketbook and his keys, the object which Gilbert had put into his hand at the last moment. And he was very much surprised. It was a decanter stopper, a little crystal stopper, like those used for the bottles in a liqueur stand. And this crystal stopper had nothing particular about it. The most that Lupin observed was that the knob, with its many facets, was gilded right down to the indent. But, to tell the truth, this detail did not seem to him of a nature to attract special notice. And it was this bit of glass to which Gilbert and Vautrin attached such stubborn importance, he said to himself. It was for this that they killed the valet, fought each other, wasted their time, risked prison, trial, the scaffold. Too tired to linger further upon this matter, exciting though it appeared to him, he replaced the stopper on the chimney-piece and got into bed. He had bad dreams. Gilbert and Vautrin were kneeling on the flags of their cells, wildly stretching out their hands to him and yelling with fright. "Help! Help!" they cried. But, Notwithstanding all his efforts, he was unable to move. He himself was fastened by invisible bonds. And, trembling, obsessed by a monstrous vision, he watched the dismal preparations, the cutting of the condemned men's hair and shirt collars, the squalid tragedy. "By Jove," he said, when he woke after a series of nightmares. "There's a lot of bad omens. Fortunately, we don't err on the side of superstition. Otherwise," and he added, "for that matter, we have a talisman which, to judge by Gilbert and Vautre's behavior, should be enough, with Lupin's help, to frustrate bad luck and secure the triumph of the good cause. Let's have a look at that crystal stopper." He sprang out of bed to take the thing and examine it more closely. An exclamation escaped him. The crystal stopper had disappeared. Chapter 2. 8 from 9 Leaves 1. Notwithstanding my friendly relations with Lupin and the many flattering proofs of his confidence which he has given me, there is one thing which I have never been quite able to fathom, and that is the organization of his gang. The existence of the gang is an undoubted fact. Certain adventures can be explained only by countless acts of devotion, invincible efforts of energy and powerful cases of complicity, representing so many forces which all obey one mighty will. But how is this will exerted? Through what intermediaries? Through what subordinates? That is what I do not know. Lupin keeps his secret, and the secrets which Lupin chooses to keep are, so to speak, impenetrable. The only supposition which I can allow myself to make is that this gang, which, in my opinion, is very limited in numbers and therefore all the more formidable, is completed and extended indefinitely by the addition of independent units, provisional associates, picked up in every class of society and in every country of the world, who are the executive agents of an authority with which, in many cases, they are not even acquainted. The companions, the initiates, the faithful adherents, men who play the leading parts under the direct command of Lupin, move to and fro between these secondary agents and the master. Gilbert and Vautre evidently belonged to the main gang, and that is why the law showed itself so implacable in their regard. For the first time, it held accomplices of Lupin in its clutches, declared undisputed accomplices, and those accomplices had committed a murder. If the murder was premeditated, if the accusation of deliberate homicide could be supported by substantial proofs, it meant the scaffold. Now there was, at the very least, one self-evident proof, the cry for assistance which Leonard had sent over the telephone a few minutes before his death. "Help! Murder! I shall be killed!" The desperate appeal had been heard by two men, the operator on duty and one of his fellow clerks, who swore to it positively. And it was in consequence of this appeal that the commissary of police, who was at once informed, had proceeded to the Villa Marie-Therese, escorted by his men and a number of soldiers off duty. Lupin had a very clear notion of the danger from the first. The fierce struggle in which he had engaged against society was entering upon a new and terrible phase. His luck was turning. It was no longer a matter of attacking others, but of defending himself and saving the heads of his two companions. A little memorandum, which I have copied from one of the notebooks in which he often jots down a summary of the situations that perplex him, will show us the workings of his brain. One definite fact, to begin with, is that Gilbert and Vautre humbugged me. The Enghien expedition, undertaken ostensibly with the object of robbing the Villa Marie-Therese, had a secret purpose. This purpose obsessed their minds throughout the operations, and what they were looking for, under the furniture and in the cupboards, was one thing and one thing alone: the crystal stopper. Therefore, if I want to see clear ahead, I must first of all know what this means. It is certain that, for some hidden reason, that mysterious piece of glass possesses an incalculable value in their eyes. And not only in theirs. For, last night, someone was bold enough and clever enough to enter my flat and steal the object in question from me. This theft of which he was the victim puzzled Lupin curiously. Two problems, both equally difficult of solution, presented themselves to his mind. First, who was the mysterious visitor? Gilbert, who enjoyed his entire confidence and acted as his private secretary, was the only one who knew of the retreat in the Rue Matignon. Now Gilbert was in prison. Was Lupin to suppose that Gilbert had betrayed him and put the police on his tracks? In that case, why were they content with taking the crystal stopper, instead of arresting him, Lupin? But there was something much stranger still. Admitting that they had been able to force the doors of his flat, and this he was compelled to admit, though there was no mark to show it, how had they succeeded in entering the bedroom? He turned the key and pushed the bolt as he did every evening, in accordance with a habit from which he never departed. And, nevertheless, the fact was undeniable. The crystal stopper had disappeared without the lock or the bolt having been touched. And, although Lupin flattered himself that he had sharp ears, even when asleep, not a sound had waked him. He took no great pains to probe the mystery. He knew those problems too well to hope that this one could be solved other than in the course of events. But, feeling very much put out and exceedingly uneasy, he then and there locked up his entresol flat in the Rue Matignon and swore that he would never set foot in it again. And he applied himself forthwith to the question of corresponding with Vautrin or Gilbert. Here a fresh disappointment awaited him. It was so clearly understood, both at the Santy prison and at the law courts, that all communication between Lupin and the prisoners must be absolutely prevented, that a multitude of minute precautions were ordered by the prefect of police and minutely observed by the lowest subordinates. Tried policemen, always the same men, watched Gilbert and Vautrin, day and night, and never let them out of their sight. Lupin, at this time, had not yet promoted himself to the crowning honor of his career, the post of chief of the detective service, and, consequently, was not able to take steps at the law courts to ensure the execution of his plans. After a fortnight of fruitless endeavors, he was obliged to bow. He did so with a raging heart and a growing sense of anxiety. The difficult part of a business, he often says, is not the finish, but the start. Where was he to start in the present circumstances? What road was he to follow? His thoughts recurred to Daubrecq the deputy, the original owner of the crystal stopper, who probably knew its importance. On the other hand, how was Gilbert aware of the doings and mode of life of Daubrecq the deputy? What means had he employed to keep him under observation? Who had told him of the place where Daubrecq spent the evening of that day? These were all interesting questions to solve. Daubrecq had moved to his winter quarters in Paris immediately after the burglary at the Villa Marie-Therese and was now living in his own house, on the left-hand side of the little square Lamartine that opens out at the end of the Avenue Victor Hugo. First disguising himself as an old gentleman of private means, strolling about, cane in hand, Lupin spent his time in the neighborhood, on the benches of the square and the avenue. He made a discovery on the first day. Two men, dressed as workmen, but behaving in a manner that left no doubt as to their aims, were watching the deputy's house. When Daubrecq went out, they set off in pursuit of him, and they were immediately behind him when he came home again. At night, as soon as the lights were out, they went away. Lupin shadowed them in his turn. They were detective officers. "Hello, hello," he said to himself. "This is hardly what I expected. So the Daubrecq bird is under suspicion." But on the fourth day, at nightfall, the two men were joined by 6 others, who conversed with them in the darkest part of the square Lamartine. And, among these new arrivals, Lupin was vastly astonished to recognize, by his figure and bearing, the famous Prasville, the erstwhile barrister, sportsman, and explorer, now favorite at the LSE, who, for some mysterious reason, had been pitchforked into the headquarters of police as Secretary-General, with a reversion of the prefecture. And, suddenly, Lupin remembered, 2 years ago, Prasville and Daubrecq the deputy had had a personal encounter on the Place du Palais Bourbon. The incident made a great stir at the time. No one knew the cause of it. Prasville had sent his seconds to Daubrecq on the same day, but Daubrecq refused to fight. A little while later, Prasville was appointed Secretary-General. Very odd, said Lupin, who remained plunged in thought, while continuing to observe Prasville's movements. At 7 o'clock Prasville's group of men moved away a few yards, in the direction of the avenue Henri Martin. The door of a small garden on the right of the house opened and Daubrecq appeared. The 2 detectives followed close behind him and, when he took the Rue Taitbout train, jumped on after him. Prasville at once walked across the square and rang the bell. The garden gate was between the house and the porter's lodge. The portress came and opened it. There was a brief conversation, after which Prasville and his companions were admitted. "A domiciliary visit," said Lupin. "Secret and illegal. By the strict rules of politeness, I ought to be invited. My presence is indispensable." Without the least hesitation he went up to the house, the door of which had not been closed, and, passing in front of the portress, who was casting her eyes outside, he asked, in the hurried tones of a person who is late for an appointment, "Have the gentlemen come?" "Yes. You will find them in the study." His plan was quite simple. If anyone met him, he would pretend to be a tradesman. But there was no need for this subterfuge. He was able, after crossing an empty hall, to enter a dining room which also had no one in it, but which, through the panes of a glass partition that separated the dining room from the study, afforded him a view of Prasville and his 5 companions. Prasville opened all the drawers with the aid of false keys. Next, he examined all the papers, while his companions took down the books from the shelves, shook the pages of each separately, and felt inside the bindings. "Of course, it's a paper they're looking for," said Lupin. "Banknotes, perhaps," Prasville exclaimed. "What rot! We shan't find a thing." Yet he obviously did not abandon all hope of discovering what he wanted, for he suddenly seized the 4 bottles in a liqueur stand, took out the 4 stoppers and inspected them. "Hello," thought Lupin. "Now he's going for decanter stoppers. Then it's not a question of a paper? Well, I give it up." Prasville next lifted and examined different objects, and he asked, "How often have you been here?" "6 times last winter," was the reply. "And you have searched the house thoroughly?" "Every one of the rooms, 4 days at a time, while he was visiting his constituency." Still, and he added, "Has he no servant at present?" "No, he is looking for one. He has his meals out, and the portress keeps the house as best she can. The woman is devoted to us." Prasville persisted in his investigations for nearly an hour and a half, shifting and fingering all the knickknacks, but taking care to put everything back exactly where he found it. At 9 o'clock, however, the 2 detectives who had followed Dobrecht burst into the study. "He's coming back. On foot." "Yes. Have we time?" "Oh, dear, yes." Prasville and the men from the police office withdrew, without undue haste, after taking a last glance round the room to make sure that there was nothing to betray their visit. The position was becoming critical for Lupin. He ran the risk of knocking up against Dobrecht if he went away, or of not being able to get out if he remained. But, on ascertaining that the dining room windows afforded a direct means of exit to the square, he resolved to stay. Besides, the opportunity of obtaining a close view of Dobrecht was too good to refuse, and, as Dobrecht had been out to dinner, there was not much chance of his entering the dining room. Lupin, therefore, waited, holding himself ready to hide behind a velvet curtain that could be drawn across the glazed partition in case of need. He heard the sound of doors opening and shutting. Someone walked into the study and switched on the light. He recognized Dobrecht. The deputy was a stout, thick-set, bull-necked man, very nearly bald, with a fringe of gray whiskers round his chin and wearing a pair of black eyeglasses under his spectacles, for his eyes were weak and strained. Lupin noticed the powerful features, the square chin, the prominent cheekbones. The hands were brawny and covered with hair, the legs bowed, and he walked with a stoop, bearing first on one hip and then on the other, which gave him something of the gait of a gorilla. But the face was topped by an enormous, lined forehead, indented with hollows and dotted with bumps. There was something bestial, something savage, something repulsive about the man's whole personality. Lupin remembered that, in the Chamber of Deputies, Dobrecht was nicknamed the Wild Man of the Woods, and that he was so labeled not only because he stood aloof and hardly ever mixed with his fellow members, but also because of his appearance, his behavior, his peculiar gait, and his remarkable muscular development. He sat down to his desk, took a meerschaum pipe from his pocket, selected a packet of Caporal among several packets of tobacco which lay drying in a bowl, tore open the wrapper, filled his pipe and lit it. Then he began to write letters. Presently he ceased his work and sat thinking, with his attention fixed on a spot on his desk. He lifted a little stamp box and examined it. Next, he verified the position of different articles which Prasville had touched and replaced, and he searched them with his eyes, felt them with his hands, bending over them as though certain signs, known to himself alone, were able to tell him what he wished to know. Lastly, he grasped the knob on an electric bell push and rang. The portress appeared a minute later. He asked, "They've been, haven't they?" And, when the woman hesitated about replying, he insisted, Come, Clemence, did you open this stamp box?" "No, sir." "Well, I fastened the lid down with a little strip of gummed paper. The strip has been broken, but I assure you," the woman began. "Why tell lies?" he said, "considering that I myself instructed you to lend yourself to those visits. The fact is that you want to keep on good terms with both sides." "Very well." He handed her a 50-franc note and repeated, "Have they been?" "Yes, The same men as in the spring. Yes, all 5 of them, with another one, who ordered them about. A tall, dark man. Yes. Lupin saw Dobrecht's mouth hardening, and Dobrecht continued. Is that all? There was one more, who came after they did and joined them, and then, just now, 2 more, the pair who usually keep watch outside the house. Did they remain in the study? Yes, sir. And they went away when I came back. A few minutes before, perhaps. Yes, sir. That will do. The woman left the room. Dobrecht returned to his letter writing. Then, stretching out his arm, he made some marks on a white writing tablet at the end of his desk and rested it against the desk as though he wished to keep it in sight. The marks were figures, and Lupin was able to read the following subtraction sum. 9/8 is equal to 1, and Dobrecht, speaking between his teeth, thoughtfully uttered the syllables. 8 from 9 leaves 1. There's not a doubt about that, he added, aloud. He wrote one more letter, a very short one, and addressed the envelope with an inscription which Lupin was able to decipher when the letter was placed beside the writing tablet. To Monsieur Prasville, Secretary General of the Prefecture of Police. Then he rang the bell again. Clements, he said, to the portress, did you go to school as a child? Yes, sir, of course I did. And were you taught arithmetic? Why, sir. Well, you're not very good at subtraction. What makes you say that? Because you don't know that 9 minus 8 equals 1. And that, you see, is a fact of the highest importance. Life becomes impossible if you are ignorant of that fundamental truth. He rose, as he spoke, and walked round the room, with his hands behind his back, swaying upon his hips. He did so once more. Then, stopping at the dining room, he opened the door. For that matter, there's another way of putting the problem. Take 8 from 9, and 1 remains. And the one who remains is here. Eh? Correct. And Monsieur supplies us with a striking proof, does he not? He patted the velvet curtain in which Lupin had hurriedly wrapped himself. Upon my word, sir, you must be stifling under this. Not to say that I might have amused myself by sticking a dagger through the curtain. Remember Hamlet's madness and Polonius' death. How now? A rat? Dead. For a ducat? Dead. Come along, Mr. Polonius. Come out of your hole. It was one of those positions to which Lupin was not accustomed and which he loathed. To catch others in a trap and pull their leg was all very well, but it was a very different thing to have people teasing him and roaring with laughter at his expense. Yet what could he answer back? You look a little pale, Mr. Polonius. Hello. Why, it's the respectable old gentleman who has been hanging about the square for some days. So you belong to the police too, Mr. Polonius? There, pull yourself together. I shan't hurt you. But you see, Clements, how right my calculation was. You told me that 9 spies had been to the house. I counted a troop of 8. As I came along, 8 of them in the distance, down the avenue. Take 8 from 9 and 1 remains. The one who evidently remained behind to see what he could see. Ecce homo. Well, and then, said Lupin, who felt a mad craving to fly at the fellow and reduce him to silence. And then? Nothing at all, my good man. What more do you want? The farce is over. I will only ask you to take this little note to Master Prasville, your employer. Clements, please show Mr. Polonius out. And, if ever he calls again, fling open the doors wide to him. Pray look upon this as your home, Mr. Polonius. Your servant, sir. Lupin hesitated. He would have liked to talk big and to come out with a farewell phrase, a parting speech, like an actor making a showy exit from the stage, and at least to disappear with the honors of war. But his defeat was so pitiable that he could think of nothing better than to bang his hat on his head and stamp his feet as he followed the portress down the hall. It was a poor revenge. You rascally beggar, he shouted, once he was outside the door, shaking his fist at Dobrecht's windows. Wretch, scum of the earth, deputy, you shall pay for this. Oh, he allows himself. Oh, he has the cheek to. Well, I swear to you, my fine fellow, that, one of these days, he was foaming with rage, all the more as, in his innermost heart, he recognized the strength of his new enemy and could not deny the masterly fashion in which he had managed this business. Dobrecht's coolness, the assurance with which he hoaxed the police officials, the contempt with which he lent himself to their visits at his house and, above all, his wonderful self-possession, his easy bearing, and the impertinence of his conduct in the presence of the ninth person who was spying on him. All this denoted a man of character, a strong man, with a well-balanced mind, lucid, bold, sure of himself and of the cards in his hand. But what were those cards? What game was he playing? Who held the stakes? And how did the players stand on either side? Lupin could not tell. Knowing nothing, he flung himself headlong into the thick of the fray, between adversaries desperately involved, though he himself was in total ignorance of their positions, their weapons, their resources, and their secret plans. For, when all was said, he could not admit that the object of all those efforts was to obtain possession of a crystal stopper. One thing alone pleased him. Dobreck had not penetrated his disguise. Dobreck believed him to be in the employ of the police. Neither Dobreck nor the police, therefore, suspected the intrusion of a third thief in the business. This was his one and only trump, a trump that gave him a liberty of action to which he attached the greatest importance. Without further delay, he opened the letter which Dobreck had handed him for the Secretary General of Police. It contained these few lines. Within reach of your hand, my dear Prasville, within reach of your hand. You touched it, a little more and the trick was done. But you're too big a fool, and to think that they couldn't hit upon anyone better than you to make me bite the dust. Poor old France. Goodbye, Prasville. But, if I catch you in the act, it will be a bad lookout for you. My maxim is to shoot at sight. Dobreck, within reach of your hand, repeated Lupin, after reading the note. And to think that the rogue may be writing the truth. The most elementary hiding places are the safest. We must look into this, all the same. And, also, we must find out why Dobreck is the object of such strict supervision and obtain a few particulars about the fellow generally. The information supplied to Lupin by a private inquiry office consisted of the following details. Alexis Dobreck, deputy of the Bouches-du-Rhône for the past 2 years, sits among the independent members. Political opinions not very clearly defined, but electoral position exceedingly strong because of the enormous sums which he spends in nursing his constituency. No private income, nevertheless, has a house in Paris, a villa at Enghien and another at Nice, and loses heavily at play, though no one knows where the money comes from. Has great influence and obtains all he wants without making up to ministers or, apparently, having either friends or connections in political circles. That's a trade docket, said Lupin to himself. What I want is a domestic docket, a police docket, which will tell me about the gentleman's private life and enable me to work more easily in this darkness and to know if I'm not getting myself into a tangle by bothering about the Dobreck bird. And time's getting short. Hang it! One of the residences which Lupin occupied at that period and which he used oftener than any of the others was in the Rue Chateaubriand, near the Arc de l'Étoile. He was known there by the name of Michel Beaumont. He had a snug flat here and was looked after by a manservant, Achille, who was utterly devoted to his interests and whose chief duty was to receive and repeat the telephone messages addressed to Lupin by his followers. Lupin, on returning home, learnt, with great astonishment, that a woman had been waiting to see him for over an hour. What? Why, no one ever comes to see me here. Is she young? No. I don't think so. You don't think so? She's wearing a lace shawl over her head, instead of a hat, and you can't see her face. She's more like a clerk or a woman employed in a shop. She's not well dressed. Whom did she ask for? Michel Beaumont, replied the servant. Queer. And why has she called? All she said was that it was about the Enghien business. So I thought that. What? The Enghien business. Then she knows that I am mixed up in that business. She knows that, by applying here, I could not get anything out of her, but I thought, all the same, that I had better let her in. Quite right. Where is she? In the drawing room. I've put on the lights. Lupin walked briskly across the hall and opened the door of the drawing room. What are you talking about? He said, to his man. There's no one here. No one here, said Achille, running up. And the room, in fact, was empty. Well, on my word, this takes the cake, cried the servant. It wasn't 20 minutes ago that I came and had a look, to make sure. She was sitting over there. And there's nothing wrong with my eyesight, you know. Look here, said Lupin, irritably. Where were you while the woman was waiting? In the hall? Governor, I never left the hall for a second. I should have seen her go out. Blow it. Still, she's not here now. So I see, moaned the man, quite flabbergasted. She must have got tired of waiting and gone away. But, dash it all, I should like to know how she got out. How she got out, said Lupin. It doesn't take a wizard to tell that. What do you mean? She got out through the window. Look, it's still ajar. We are on the ground floor. The street is almost always deserted, in the evenings. There's no doubt about it. He had looked around him and satisfied himself that nothing had been taken away or moved. The room, for that matter, contained no knick-knack of any value, no important paper that might have explained the woman's visit, followed by her sudden disappearance. And yet why that inexplicable flight? Has anyone telephoned? He asked. Any letters? Yes, one letter by the last post. Where is it? I put it on your mantelpiece, Governor, as usual. Lupin's bedroom was next to the drawing room, but Lupin had permanently bolted the door between the two. He, therefore, had to go through the hall again. Lupin switched on the electric light and, the next moment, said, I don't see it. Yes. I put it next to the flower bowl. There's nothing here at all. You must be looking in the wrong place, Governor. But Akil moved the bowl, lifted the clock, bent down to the grate. In vain. The letter was not there. Oh, blast it, he muttered. She's done it, she's taken it. And then, when she had the letter, she cleared out. Oh, the slut, Lupin said. You're mad. There's no way through between the two rooms. Then who did take it, Governor? They were both of them silent. Lupin strove to control his anger and collect his ideas. He asked, Did you look at the envelope? Yes. Anything particular about it? Yes. It looked as if it had been written in a hurry, or scribbled, rather. How was the address worded? Do you remember? Asked Lupin, in a voice strained with anxiety. Yes, I remembered it, because it struck me as funny. But speak, will you? Speak. It said, Monsieur de Beaumont, Michel. Lupin took his servant by the shoulders and shook him. It said de Beaumont? Are you sure? And Michel after Beaumont? Quite certain. Ah, muttered Lupin, with a choking throat. It was a letter from Gilbert. He stood motionless, a little pale, with drawn features. There was no doubt about it. The letter was from Gilbert. It was the form of address which, by Lupin's orders, Gilbert had used for years in corresponding with him. Gilbert had at last, after long waiting and by dint of endless artifices, found a means of getting a letter posted from his prison and had hastily written to him. And now the letter was intercepted. What did it say? What instructions had the unhappy prisoner given? What help was he praying for? What stratagem did he suggest? Lupin looked round the room, which, contrary to the drawing room, contained important papers. But none of the locks had been forced, and he was compelled to admit that the woman had no other object than to get hold of Gilbert's letter. Constraining himself to keep his temper, he asked, Did the letter come while the woman was here? At the same time. The porter rang at the same moment. Could she see the envelope? Yes. The conclusion was evident. It remained to discover how the visitor had been able to effect her theft. By slipping from one window to the other, outside the flat? Impossible. Lupin found the window of his room shut. By opening the communicating door? Impossible. Lupin found it locked and barred with its two inner bolts. Nevertheless, a person cannot pass through a wall by a mere operation of will. To go in or out of a room requires a passage, and, as the act was accomplished in the space of a few minutes, it was necessary, in the circumstances, that the passage should be previously in existence, that it should already have been contrived in the wall and, of course, known to the woman. This hypothesis simplified the search by concentrating it upon the door, for the wall was quite bare, without a cupboard, chimneypiece, or hangings of any kind, and unable to conceal the least outlet. Lupin went back to the drawing room and prepared to make a study of the door. But he at once gave a start. He perceived, at the first glance, that the left lower panel of the 6 small panels contained within the crossbars of the door no longer occupied its normal position, and that the light did not fall straight upon it. On leaning forward, he saw 2 little tin tacks sticking out on either side and holding the panel in place, similar to a wooden board behind a picture frame. He had only to shift these. The panel at once came out. Akil gave a cry of amazement. But Lupin objected. Well, and what then? We are no better off than before. Here is an empty oblong, 8 or 9 inches wide by 16 inches high. You're not going to pretend that a woman can slip through an opening which would not admit the thinnest child of 10 years old. No, but she can have put her arm through and drawn the bolts. The bottom bolt, yes, said Lupin. But the top bolt, no. The distance is far too great. Try for yourself and see. Akil tried and had to give up the attempt. Lupin did not reply. He stood thinking for a long time. Then, suddenly, he said, "Give me my hat, my coat." He hurried off, urged by an imperative idea, and, the moment he reached the street, he sprang into a taxi. Rue Matignon, quick! As soon as they came to the house where he had been robbed of the crystal stopper, he jumped out of the cab, opened his private entrance, went upstairs, ran to the drawing room, turned on the light and crouched at the foot of the door leading to his bedroom. He had guessed right. One of the little panels was loosened in the same manner. And, just as in his other flat in the Rue Chateaubriand, the opening was large enough to admit a man's arm and shoulder, but not to allow him to draw the upper bolt. "Hang!" he shouted, unable any longer to master the rage that had been seething within him for the last 2 hours. "Blast! Shall I never have finished with this confounded business?" In fact, an incredible ill luck seemed to dog his footsteps, compelling him to grope about at random, without permitting him to use the elements of success which his own persistency or the very force of things placed within his grasp. Gilbert gave him the crystal stopper. Gilbert sent him a letter, and both had disappeared at that very moment. And it was not, as he had until then believed, a series of fortuitous and independent circumstances. No, it was manifestly the effect of an adversary pursuing a definite object with prodigious ability and incredible boldness, attacking him, Lupin, in the recesses of his safest retreats and baffling him with blows so severe and so unexpected that he did not even know against whom he had to defend himself. Never, in the course of his adventures, had he encountered such obstacles as now. And, little by little, deep down within himself, there grew a haunting dread of the future. A date loomed before his eyes, the terrible date which he unconsciously assigned to the law to perform its work of vengeance, the date upon which, in the light of a WN April morning, 2 men would mount the scaffold, 2 men who had stood by him, 2 comrades whom he had been unable to save from paying the awful penalty. Chapter 3. The Home Life of Alexis Daubrecq. When Daubrecq the deputy came in from lunch on the day after the police had searched his house, he was stopped by Clemence, his portress, who told him that she had found a cook who could be thoroughly relied on. The cook arrived a few minutes later and produced first-rate characters, signed by people with whom it was easy to take up her references. She was a very active woman, although of a certain age, and agreed to do the work of the house by herself, without the help of a manservant, this being a condition upon which Daubrecq insisted. Her last place was with a member of the Chamber of Deputies, Comte Saulevet, to whom Daubrecq at once telephoned. The Count's steward gave her a perfect character, and she was engaged. As soon as she had fetched her trunk, she set to work and cleaned and scrubbed until it was time to cook the dinner. Daubrecq dined and went out. At 11 o'clock, after the portress had gone to bed, the cook cautiously opened the garden gate. A man came up. "Is that you?" she asked. "Yes, it's I, Lupin." She took him to her bedroom on the 3rd floor, overlooking the garden, and at once burst into lamentations. "More of your tricks and nothing but tricks. Why can't you leave me alone, instead of sending me to do your dirty work? How can I help it, you dear old Victoire? When I want a person of respectable appearance and incorruptible morals, I think of you. You ought to be flattered. That's all you care about me," she cried. "You run me into danger once more, and you think it's funny. What are you risking?" "How do you mean? What am I risking? All my characters are false. Characters are always false. And suppose M. Daubrecq finds out? Suppose he makes inquiries." "He has made inquiries." "Hey, what's that?" "He has telephoned to the steward of Comte Saulevet, in whose service you say that you have had the honor of being. There, you see, I'm done for. The Count's steward could not say enough in your praise. He does not know me, but I know him. I got him his situation with Comte Saulevet. So you understand." Victoire seemed to calm down a little. "Well," she said, "God's will be done, or rather yours. And what do you expect me to do in all this? First, to put me up. You were my wet nurse once. You can very well give me half your room now. I'll sleep in the armchair. And next, to supply me with such food as I want. And next, to undertake, with me and under my direction, a regular series of searches with a view. To what? To discovering the precious object of which I spoke to you. What's that? A crystal stopper. A crystal stopper. Saints above. A nice business. And, if we don't find your confounded stopper, what then? Lupin took her gently by the arm and, in a serious voice, if we don't find it, Gilbert, young Gilbert whom you know and love, will stand every chance of losing his head. And so will Vautrin. Vautrin I don't mind, a dirty rascal like him. But Gilbert, have you seen the papers this evening? Things are looking worse than ever. Vautrin, as might be expected, accuses Gilbert of stabbing the valet. And it so happens that the knife which Vautrin used belonged to Gilbert. That came out this morning. Whereupon Gilbert, who was intelligent in his way, but easily frightened, blithered and launched forth into stories and lies which will end in his undoing. That's how the matter stands. Will you help me? The deputy came home at midnight. Thenceforth, for several days, Lupin molded his existence upon Daubrecq's, beginning his investigations the moment the deputy left the house. He pursued them methodically, dividing each room into sections which he did not abandon until he had been through the tiniest nooks and corners and, so to speak, exhausted every possible device. Victoire searched also, and nothing was forgotten. Table legs, chair rungs, floorboards, moldings, mirror and picture frames, clocks, plinths, curtain borders, telephone holders and electric fittings. Everything that an ingenious imagination could have selected as a hiding place was overhauled. And they also watched the deputy's least actions, his most unconscious movements, the expression of his face, the books which he read and the letters which he wrote. It was easy enough. He seemed to live his life in the light of day. No door was ever shut. He received no visits. And his existence worked with mechanical regularity. He went to the chamber in the afternoon, to the club in the evening. Still, said Lupin, there must be something that's not orthodox behind all this. There's nothing of the sort, moaned Victoire. You're wasting your time and we shall be bowled out. The presence of the detectives and their habit of walking up and down outside the windows drove her mad. She refused to admit that they were there for any other purpose than to trap her, Victoire. And, each time that she went shopping, she was quite surprised that one of those men did not lay his hand upon her shoulder. One day she returned all upset. Her basket of provisions was shaking on her arm. What's the matter, my dear Victoire? Said Lupin. You're looking green. Green? I dare say I do. So would you look green? She had to sit down, and it was only after making repeated efforts that she succeeded in stuttering. A man spoke to me, at the fruiterer's. By jingo! Did he want you to run away with him? No, he gave me a letter. Then what are you complaining about? It was a love letter, of course. No, it's for your governor, said he. My governor? I said. Yes, he said, for the gentleman who's staying in your room. What's that? This time, Lupin had started. Give it here, he said, snatching the letter from her. The envelope bore no address. But there was another, inside it, on which he read, Monsieur Arsène Lupin. Victoire. The devil, he said. This is a bit thick. He tore open the second envelope. It contained a sheet of paper with the following words, written in large capitals. Everything you are doing is useless and dangerous. Give it up. Victoire uttered one moan and fainted. As for Lupin, he felt himself blush up to his eyes, as though he had been grossly insulted. He experienced all the humiliation which a duellist would undergo if he heard the most secret advice which he had received from his seconds repeated aloud by a mocking adversary. However, he held his tongue. Victoire went back to her work. As for him, he remained in his room all day, thinking. That night he did not sleep, and he kept saying to himself, what is the good of thinking? I am up against one of those problems which are not solved by any amount of thought. It is certain that I am not alone in the matter, and that, between Daubrecq and the police, there is, in addition to the third thief that I am, a fourth thief who is working on his own account, who knows me and who reads my game clearly. But who is this fourth thief? And am I mistaken, by any chance? And, oh, rot. Let's get to sleep. But he could not sleep, and a good part of the night went in this way. At 4 o'clock in the morning he seemed to hear a noise in the house. He jumped up quickly and, from the top of the staircase, saw Dobrecht go down the first flight and turn toward the garden. A minute later, after opening the gate, the deputy returned with a man whose head was buried in an enormous fur collar and showed him into his study. Lupin had taken his precautions in view of any such contingency. As the windows of the study and those of his bedroom, both of which were at the back of the house, overlooked the garden, he fastened a rope ladder to his balcony, unrolled it softly and let himself down by it until it was level with the top of the study windows. These windows were closed by shutters, but, as they were bowed, there remained a semicircular space at the top, and Lupin, though he could not hear, was able to see all that went on inside. He then realized that the person whom he had taken for a man was a woman who was still young, though her dark hair was mingled with gray, a tall woman, elegantly but quite unobtrusively dressed, whose handsome features bore the expression of weariness and melancholy which long suffering gives. Where the deuce have I seen her before? Lupin asked himself, for I certainly know that face, that look, that expression. She stood leaning against the table, listening impassively to Dobrecht, who was also standing and who was talking very excitedly. He had his back turned to Lupin, but Lupin, leaning forward, caught sight of a glass in which the deputy's image was reflected, and he was startled to see the strange look in his eyes, the air of fierce and brutal desire with which Dobrecht was staring at his visitor. It seemed to embarrass her too, for she sat down with lowered lids. Then Dobrecht leant over her, and it appeared as though he were ready to fling his long arms, with their huge hands, around her. And, suddenly, Lupin perceived great tears rolling down the woman's sad face. Whether or not it was the sight of those tears that made Dobrecht lose his head, with a brusque movement he clutched the woman and drew her to him. She repelled him, with a violence full of hatred. And, after a brief struggle, during which Lupin caught a glimpse of the man's bestial and contorted features, the two of them stood face to face, railing at each other like mortal enemies. Then they stopped. Dobrecht sat down. There was mischief in his face, and sarcasm as well, and he began to talk again, with sharp taps on the table, as though he were dictating terms. She no longer stirred. She sat haughtily in her chair and towered over him, absent-minded, with roaming eyes. Lupin, captivated by that powerful and sorrowful countenance, continued to watch her, and he was vainly seeking to remember of what or of whom she reminded him, when he noticed that she had turned her head slightly and that she was imperceptibly moving her arm. And her arm strayed farther and farther, and her hand crept along the table, and Lupin saw that, at the end of the table, there stood a water bottle with a gold-topped stopper. The hand reached the water bottle, felt it, rose gently and seized the stopper. A quick movement of the head, a glance, and the stopper was put back in its place. Obviously, it was not what the woman hoped to find. "Dash it," said Lupin. "She's after the crystal stopper too. The matter is becoming more complicated daily. There's no doubt about it." But, on renewing his observation of the visitor, he was astounded to note the sudden and unexpected expression of her countenance, a terrible, implacable, ferocious expression. And he saw that her hand was continuing its stealthy progress round the table, and that, with an uninterrupted and crafty sliding movement, it was pushing back books and, slowly and surely, approaching a dagger whose blade gleamed among the scattered papers. It gripped the handle. Dobrecht went on talking. Behind his back, the hand rose steadily, little by little, and Lupin saw the woman's desperate and furious eyes fixed upon the spot in the neck where she intended to plant the knife. "You're doing a very silly thing, fair lady," thought Lupin, and he already began to turn over in his mind the best means of escaping and of taking victoire with him. She hesitated, however, with uplifted arm, but it was only a momentary weakness. She clenched her teeth. Her whole face, contracted with hatred, became yet further convulsed, and she made the dread movement. At the same instant Dobrecht crouched and, springing from his seat, turned and seized the woman's frail wrist in midair. Oddly enough, he addressed no reproach to her, as though the deed which she had attempted surprised him no more than any ordinary, very natural and simple act. He shrugged his shoulders, like a man accustomed to that sort of danger, and strode up and down in silence. She had dropped the weapon and was now crying, holding her head between her hands, with sobs that shook her whole frame. He next came up to her and said a few words, once more tapping the table as he spoke. She made a sign in the negative and, when he insisted, she, in her turn, stamped her foot on the floor and exclaimed, loud enough for Lupin to hear. "Never! Never!" Thereupon, without another word, Dobreck fetched the fur cloak which she had brought with her and hung it over the woman's shoulders, while she shrouded her face in a lace wrap. And he showed her out. 2 minutes later, the garden gate was locked again. "Pity I can't run after that strange person," thought Lupin, "and have a chat with her about the Dobreck bird. Seems to me that we two could do a good stroke of business together." In any case, there was one point to be cleared up. Dobreck the deputy, whose life was so orderly, so apparently respectable, was in the habit of receiving visits at night, when his house was no longer watched by the police. He sent Victoire to arrange with 2 members of his gang to keep watch for several days, and he himself remained awake next night. As on the previous morning, he heard a noise at 4 o'clock. As on the previous morning, the deputy let someone in. Lupin ran down his ladder and, when he came to the free space above the shutters, saw a man crawling at Dobreck's feet, flinging his arms round Dobreck's knees in frenzied despair and weeping convulsively. Dobreck, laughing, pushed him away repeatedly, but the man clung to him. He behaved almost like one out of his mind and, at last, in a genuine fit of madness, half rose to his feet, took the deputy by the throat and flung him back in a chair. Dobreck struggled, powerless at first, while his veins swelled in his temples. But soon, with a strength far beyond the ordinary, he regained the mastery and deprived his adversary of all power of movement. Then, holding him with one hand, with the other he gave him 2 great smacks in the face. The man got up, slowly. He was livid and could hardly stand on his legs. He waited for a moment, as though to recover his self-possession. Then, with a terrifying calmness, he drew a revolver from his pocket and leveled it at Dobreck. Dobreck did not flinch. He even smiled, with a defiant air and without displaying more excitement than if he had been aimed at with a toy pistol. The man stood for perhaps 15 or 20 seconds, facing his enemy, with outstretched arm. Then, with the same deliberate slowness, revealing a self-control which was all the more impressive because it followed upon a fit of extreme excitement, he put up his revolver and, from another pocket, produced his note-case. Dobreck took a step forward. The man opened the pocketbook. A sheaf of banknotes appeared in sight. Dobreck seized and counted them. They were 1,000-franc notes, and there were 30 of them. The man looked on, without a movement of revolt, without a protest. He obviously understood the futility of words. Dobreck was one of those who do not relent. Why should his visitor waste time in beseeching him or even in revenging himself upon him by uttering vain threats and insults? He had no hope of striking that unassailable enemy. Even Dobreck's death would not deliver him from Dobreck. He took his hat and went away. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Victoire, on returning from her shopping, handed Lupin a note from his accomplices. He opened it and read, "The man who came to see Dobreck last night is Langeroux the deputy, leader of the independent left. A poor man, with a large family." "Come," said Lupin, "Dobreck is nothing more nor less than a blackmailer. But, by Jupiter, he has jolly effective ways of going to work." Events tended to confirm Lupin's supposition. 3 days later he saw another visitor hand Dobreck an important sum of money. And, 2 days after that, one came and left a pearl necklace behind him. The first was called Darcalmorn, a senator and ex-cabinet minister. The second was the Marquis d'Albufex, a Bonapartist deputy, formerly chief political agent in France of Prince Napoleon. The scene, in each of these cases, was very similar to Langeroux the deputy's interview, a violent tragic scene, ending in Dobreck's victory. And so on and so forth, thought Lupin, when he received these particulars. I have been present at 4 visits. I shall know no more if there are 10, or 20, or 30. It is enough for me to learn the names of the visitors from my friends on Centrigo outside. Shall I go and call on them? What for? They have no reason to confide in me. On the other hand, am I to stay on here, delayed by investigations which lead to nothing and which Victoire can continue just as well without me? He was very much perplexed. The news of the inquiry into the case of Gilbert and Vautrin was becoming worse and worse. The days were slipping by, and not an hour passed without his asking himself, in anguish, whether all his efforts, granting that he succeeded, would not end in farcical results, absolutely foreign to the aim which he was pursuing. For, after all, supposing that he did fathom Dobreck's underhand dealings, Would that give him the means of rescuing Gilbert and Vautrin? That day an incident occurred which put an end to his indecision. After lunch, Victoire heard snatches of a conversation which Daubrec held with someone on the telephone. Lupin gathered, from what Victoire reported, that the deputy had an appointment with a lady for 8:30 and that he was going to take her to a theatre. "I shall get a pit-tier box, like the one we had 6 weeks ago," Daubrec had said. And he added, with a laugh, "I hope that I shall not have the burglars in during that time." There was not a doubt in Lupin's mind. Daubrec was about to spend his evening in the same manner in which he had spent the evening 6 weeks ago, while they were breaking into his villa at Enghien. To know the person whom he was to meet and perhaps thus to discover how Gilbert and Vautrin had learnt that Daubrec would be away from 8 o'clock in the evening until 1 o'clock in the morning. These were matters of the utmost importance. Lupin left the house in the afternoon, with Victoire's assistance. He knew through her that Daubrec was coming home for dinner earlier than usual. He went to his flat in the Rue Chateaubriand, telephoned for 3 of his friends, dressed and made himself up in his favorite character of a Russian prince, with fair hair and moustache and short-cut whiskers. The accomplices arrived in a motorcar. At that moment, Achille, his man, brought him a telegram, addressed to M. Michel Beaumont, Rue Chateaubriand, which ran, "Do not come to theatre this evening. Danger of your intervention spoiling everything." There was a flower vase on the chimney-piece beside him. Lupin took it and smashed it to pieces. That's it, he snarled. "They are playing with me as I usually play with others. Same behavior, same tricks, only there's this difference." What difference? He hardly knew. The truth was that he too was baffled and disconcerted to the inmost recesses of his being, and that he was continuing to act only from obstinacy, from a sense of duty, so to speak, and without putting his ordinary good humor and high spirits into the work. "Come along," he said to his accomplices. By his instructions, the chauffeur set them down near the Square Lamartine, but kept the motor going. Lupin foresaw that Daubrec, in order to escape the detectives watching the house, would jump into the first taxi, and he did not intend to be outdistanced. He had not allowed for Daubrec's cleverness. At 7:30, both leaves of the garden gate were flung open. A bright light flashed and a motorcycle darted across the road, skirted the square, turned in front of the motorcar and shot away toward the boys at a speed so great that they would have been mad to go in pursuit of it. "Goodbye, Daisy," said Lupin, trying to jest, but really overcome with rage. He eyed his accomplices in the hope that one of them would venture to give a mocking smile. How pleased he would have been to vent his nerves on them. "Let's go home," he said to his companions. He gave them some dinner. Then he smoked a cigar and they set off again in the car and went the round of the theatres, beginning with those which were giving light operas and musical comedies, for which he presumed that Daubrec and his lady would have a preference. He took a stall, inspected the lower-tier boxes and went away again. He next drove to the more serious theatres, the Renaissance, the Gymnase. At last, at 10 o'clock in the evening, he saw a pit-tier box at the Vaudeville almost entirely protected from inspection by its 2 screens, and, on tipping the box-keeper, was told that it contained a short, stout, elderly gentleman and a lady who was wearing a thick lace veil. The next box was free. He took it, went back to his friends to give them their instructions and sat down near the couple. During the entr'acte, when the lights went up, he perceived Daubrec's profile. The lady remained at the back of the box, invisible. The two were speaking in a low voice, and, when the curtain rose again, they went on speaking, but in such a way that Lupin could not distinguish a word. 10 minutes passed. Someone tapped at their door. It was one of the men from the box office. "Are you le Deputy Daubrec, sir?" he asked. "Yes," said Daubrec, in a voice of surprise. "But how do you know my name?" "There's a gentleman asking for you on the telephone. He told me to go to box 22. "But who is it?" Le Marquis d'Albufex." "Hey, what am I to say, sir?" I'm coming." Daubrec rose hurriedly from his seat and followed the clerk to the box office. He was not yet out of sight when Lupin sprang from his box, worked the lock of the next door and sat down beside the lady. She gave a stifled cry. "Hush," he said. "I have to speak to you. It is most important." "Ah," she said, between her teeth. "Arsène Lupin." He was dumbfounded. For a moment he sat quiet, open-mouthed. The woman knew him, and not only did she know him, but she had recognized him through his disguise. Accustomed though he was to the most extraordinary and unusual events, this disconcerted him. He did not even dream of protesting and stammered. So you know. He snatched at the lady's veil and pulled it aside before she had time to defend herself. What? He muttered, with increased amazement. Is it possible? It was the woman whom he had seen at Dordrecht's a few days earlier. The woman who had raised her dagger against Dordrecht and who had intended to stab him with all the strength of her hatred. It was her turn to be taken aback. What? Have you seen me before? Yes, the other night, at his house. I saw what you tried to do. She made a movement to escape. He held her back and, speaking with great eagerness. I must know who you are, he said. That was why I had Dordrecht telephoned for. She looked aghast. Do you mean to say it was not the Marquis d'Albufex? No, it was one of my assistants. Then Dordrecht will come back. Yes, but we have time. Listen to me. We must meet again. He is your enemy. I will save you from him. Why should you? What is your object? Do not distrust me. It is quite certain that our interests are identical. Where can I see you? Tomorrow, surely? At what time? And where? Well, she looked at him with obvious hesitation, not knowing what to do, on the point of speaking and yet full of uneasiness and doubt. He pressed her. Oh, I entreat you, answer me just one word, and at once. It would be a pity for him to find me here. I entreat you. She answered sharply. My name doesn't matter. We will see each other first, and you shall explain to me. Yes, we will meet. Listen, tomorrow, at 3 o'clock, at the corner of the boulevard. At that exact moment, the door of the box opened, so to speak, with a bang, and Dordrecht appeared. Rats, Lupin mumbled, under his breath, furious at being caught before obtaining what he wanted. Dordrecht gave a chuckle. So that's it. I thought something was up. Ah, the telephone trick, a little out of date, sir. I had not gone halfway when I turned back. He pushed Lupin to the front of the box and, sitting down beside the lady, said, And, now my lord, who are we? A servant at the police office, probably? There's a professional look about that mug of yours. He stared hard at Lupin, who did not move a muscle, and tried to put a name to the face, but failed to recognize the man whom he had called Polonius. Lupin, without taking his eyes from Dordrecht either, reflected. He would not for anything in the world have thrown up the game at that point or neglected this favorable opportunity of coming to an understanding with his mortal enemy. The woman sat in her corner, motionless, and watched them both. Lupin said, Let us go outside, sir. That will make our interview easier. No, my lord, here, grinned the deputy. It will take place here, presently, during the entr'acte. Then we shall not be disturbing anybody. But, save your breath, my man, you shunty budge. And he took Lupin by the coat collar, with the obvious intention of not letting go of him before the interval. A rash move. Was it likely that Lupin would consent to remain in such an attitude, especially before a woman to whom he had offered his alliance, a woman, and he now thought of it for the first time, who was distinctly good-looking and whose grave beauty attracted him. His whole pride as a man rose at the thought. However, he said nothing. He accepted the heavy weight of the hand on his shoulder and even sat bent in two, as though beaten, powerless, almost frightened. Clever, said the deputy, scoffingly. We don't seem to be swaggering quite so much. The stage was full of actors who were arguing and making a noise. Dordrecht had loosened his grasp slightly, and Lupin felt that the moment had come. With the edge of his hand, he gave him a violent blow in the hollow of the arm, as he might have done with a hatchet. The pain took Dordrecht off his guard. Lupin now released himself entirely and sprang at the other to clutch him by the throat. But Dordrecht had at once put himself on the defensive and stepped back, and their four hands seized one another. They gripped with superhuman energy, the whole force of the two adversaries concentrating in those hands. Dordrecht's were of monstrous size, and Lupin, caught in that iron vice, felt as though he were fighting not with a man, but with some terrible beast, a huge gorilla. They held each other against the door, bending low, like a pair of wrestlers groping and trying to lay hold of each other. Their bones creaked. Whichever gave way first was bound to be caught by the throat and strangled. And all this happened amid a sudden silence, for the actors on the stage were now listening to one of their number, who was speaking in a low voice. The woman stood back flat against the partition, looking at them in terror. Had she taken sides with either of them, with a single movement, the victory would at once have been decided in that one's favor. But which of them should she assist? What could Lupin represent in her eyes? A friend? An enemy? She briskly made for the front of the box, forced back the screen and, leaning forward, seemed to give a signal. Then she returned and tried to slip to the door. Lupin, as though wishing to help her, said, "Why don't you move the chair?" He was speaking of a heavy chair which had fallen down between him and Dobreck and across which they were struggling. The woman stooped and pulled away the chair. That was what Lupin was waiting for. Once rid of the obstacle, he caught Dobreck a smart kick on the shin with the tip of his patent leather boot. The result was the same as with the blow which he had given him on the arm. The pain caused a second's apprehension and distraction, of which he at once took advantage to beat down Dobreck's outstretched hands and to dig his 10 fingers into his adversary's throat and neck. Dobreck struggled. Dobreck tried to pull away the hands that were throttling him, but he was beginning to choke and felt his strength decreasing. "Ah, you old monkey," growled Lupin, forcing him to the floor. "Why don't you shout for help? How frightened you must be of a scandal." At the sound of the fall there came a knocking at the partition, on the other side. knock away," said Lupin, under his breath. "The play is on the stage. This is my business, and until I've mastered this gorilla." It did not take him long. The deputy was choking. Lupin stunned him with a blow on the jaw, and all that remained for him to do was to take the woman away and make his escape with her before the alarm was given. But, when he turned round, he saw that the woman was gone. She could not be far. Darting from the box, he set off at a run, regardless of the program sellers and check-takers. On reaching the entrance lobby, he saw her through an open door, crossing the pavement of the Chaussée d'Antin. She was stepping into a motorcar when he came up with her. The door closed behind her. He seized the handle and tried to pull at it. But a man jumped up inside and sent his fist flying into Lupin's face, with less skill but no less force than Lupin had sent his into Dobreck's face. Stunned though he was by the blow, he nevertheless had ample time to recognize the man, in a sudden, startled vision, and also to recognize, under his chauffeur's disguise, the man who was driving the car. It was the Growler and the Masher, the two men in charge of the boats on the Enghien night, two friends of Gilbert and Vautrin. In short, two of Lupin's own accomplices. When he reached his rooms in the Rue Chateaubriand, Lupin, after washing the blood from his face, sat for over an hour in a chair, as though overwhelmed. For the first time in his life he was experiencing the pain of treachery. For the first time his comrades in the fight were turning against their chief. Mechanically, to divert his thoughts, he turned to his correspondence and tore the wrapper from an evening paper. Among the late news he found the following paragraphs. The Villa Marie-Tauis case. The real identity of Vautrin, one of the alleged murderers of Leonard the valet, has at last been ascertained. He is a miscreant of the worst type, a hardened criminal who has already twice been sentenced for murder, in default, under another name. No doubt, the police will end by also discovering the real name of his accomplice, Gilbert. In any event, the examining magistrate is determined to commit the prisoners for trial as soon as possible. The public will have no reason to complain of the delays of the law. In between other newspapers and prospectuses lay a letter. Lupin jumped when he saw it. It was addressed, Monsieur de Beaumont, Michel. "Oh," he gasped, "a letter from Gilbert." It contained these few words. "Help, Governor. I am frightened. I am frightened." Once again, Lupin spent a night alternating between sleeplessness and nightmares. Once again, he was tormented by atrocious and terrifying visions. Chapter 4. The Chief of the Enemies. "Poor boy," murmured Lupin, when his eyes fell on Gilbert's letter next morning. How he must feel it. On the very first day when he saw him, he had taken a liking to that well-set-up youngster, so careless, gay and fond of life. Gilbert was devoted to him, would have accepted death at a sign from his master. And Lupin also loved his frankness, his good humor, his simplicity, his bright, open face. "Gilbert," he often used to say, "you are an honest man. Do you know, if I were you, I should chuck the business and become an honest man for good." "After you, Governor," Gilbert would reply, with a laugh. "Won't you, though?" "No, Governor. An honest man is a chap who works and grinds. It's a taste which I may have had as a nipper, but they've made me lose it since." "Who's they?" Gilbert was silent. He was always silent when questioned about his early life, and all that Lupin knew was that he had been an orphan since childhood and that he had lived all over the place, changing his name and taking up the queerest jobs. The whole thing was a mystery which no one had been able to fathom, and it did not look as though the police would make much of it either. Nor, on the other hand, did it look as though the police would consider that mystery a reason for delaying proceedings. They would send Vautre's accomplice for trial, under his name of Gilbert or any other name, and visit him with the same inevitable punishment. "Poor boy," repeated Lupin. "They are persecuting him like this only because of me. They are afraid of his escaping and they are in a hurry to finish the business. The verdict first and then the execution." "Oh, the butchers." A lad of 20, who has committed no murder, who is not even an accomplice in the murder. Alas, Lupin well knew that this was a thing impossible to prove and that he must concentrate his efforts upon another point. But upon which? Was he to abandon the trail of the crystal stopper? He could not make up his mind to that. His one and only diversion from the search was to go to Enghien, where the Growler and the Masher lived, and make sure that nothing had been seen of them since the murder at the Villa Marie-Therese. Apart from this, he applied himself to the question of Dorbreck and nothing else. He refused even to trouble his head about the problems set before him. The treachery of the Growler and the Masher, their connection with the grey-haired lady, the spying of which he himself was the object. "Steady, Lupin," he said. "One only argues falsely in a fever. So hold your tongue. No inferences, above all things. Nothing is more foolish than to infer one fact from another before finding a certain starting point. That's where you get up a tree. Listen to your instinct. Act according to your instinct. And as you are persuaded, outside all argument, outside all logic, one might say, that this business turns upon that confounded stopper, go for it boldly. Have it Dorbreck and his bit of crystal." Lupin did not wait to arrive at these conclusions before settling his actions accordingly. At the moment when he was stating them in his mind, 3 days after the scene at the vaudeville, he was sitting, dressed like a retired tradesman, in an old overcoat, with a muffler round his neck, on a bench in the Avenue Victor Hugo, at some distance from the Square Lamartine. Victoire had his instructions to pass by that bench at the same hour every morning. Yes, he repeated to himself, the crystal stopper, everything turns on that. Once I get hold of it. Victoire arrived, with her shopping basket on her arm. He at once noticed her extraordinary agitation and pallor. "What's the matter?" asked Lupin, walking beside his old nurse. She went into a big grocer's, which was crowded with people, and, turning to him, "Here," she said, in a voice torn with excitement. "Here's what you've been hunting for." And, taking something from her basket, she gave it to him. Lupin stood astounded. In his hand lay the crystal stopper. "Can it be true? Can it be true?" he muttered, as though the ease of the solution had thrown him off his balance. But the fact remained, visible and palpable. He recognized by its shape, by its size, by the worn gilding of its facets, recognized beyond any possible doubt the crystal stopper which he had seen before. He even remarked a tiny, hardly noticeable little scratch on the stem which he remembered perfectly. However, while the thing presented all the same characteristics, it possessed no other that seemed out of the way. It was a crystal stopper, that was all. There was no really special mark to distinguish it from other stoppers. There was no sign upon it, no stamp, and, being cut from a single piece, it contained no foreign object. What then? And Lupin received a quick insight into the depth of his mistake. What good could the possession of that crystal stopper do him so long as he was ignorant of its value? That bit of glass had no existence in itself. It counted only through the meaning that attached to it. Before taking it, the thing was to be certain. And how could he tell that, in taking it, in robbing Dorbreck of it, he was not committing an act of folly? It was a question which was impossible of solution, but which forced itself upon him with singular directness. No blunders, he said to himself, as he pocketed the stopper. In this confounded business, blunders are fatal. He had not taken his eyes off Victoire. Accompanied by a shopman, she went from counter to counter, among the throng of customers. She next stood for some little while at the pay desk and passed in front of Lupin. He whispered her instructions. "Meet me behind the Lycée Janssen." She joined him in an unfrequented street. "And suppose I'm followed?" she said. "No," he declared. "I look carefully. Listen to me. Where did you find the stopper?" in the drawer of the table by his bed. But we had felt there already. Yes, and I did so again this morning. I expect he put it there last night. And I expect he'll want to take it from there again, said Lupin. Very likely. And suppose he finds it gone? Victoire looked frightened. Answer me, said Lupin. If he finds it gone, he'll accuse you of taking it. Won't he? Certainly. Then go and put it back, as fast as you can. Oh dear, she moaned. I hope he won't have had time to find out. Give it to me, quick. Here you are, said Lupin. He felt in the pocket of his overcoat. Well, said Victoire, holding out her hand. Well, he said, after a moment, it's gone. What? Yes, upon my word, it's gone. Somebody's taken it from me. He burst into a peal of laughter, a laughter which, this time, was free from all bitterness. Victoire flew out at him. Laugh away. Putting me in such a predicament. How can I help laughing? You must confess that it's funny. It's no longer a tragedy that we're acting, but a fairy tale, as much a fairy tale as Puss in Boots or Jack and the Beanstalk. I must write it when I get a few weeks to myself. The Magic Stopper, or The Mishaps of Poor Arsène. Well, who has taken it from you? What are you talking about? It has flown away, vanished from my pocket. Hey presto, begone. He gave the old servant a gentle push and, in a more serious tone, go home, Victoire, and don't upset yourself. Of course, someone saw you give me the stopper and took advantage of the crowd in the shop to pick my pocket of it. That only shows that we are watched more closely than I thought and by adversaries of the first rank. But, once more, be easy. Honest men always come by their own. Have you anything else to tell me? Yes. Someone came yesterday evening, while M. D'Aubrec was out. I saw lights reflected upon the trees in the garden. The portress' bedroom. The portress was up. Then it was some of those detective fellows. They are still hunting. I'll see you later, Victoire. You must let me in again. What? You want to? What do I risk? Your room is on the 3rd floor. D'Aubrec suspects nothing. But the others? The others? If it was to their interest to play me a trick, they'd have tried before now. I'm in their way, that's all. They're not afraid of me. So till later, Victoire, at 5 o'clock exactly. One further surprise awaited Lupin. In the evening his old nurse told him that, having opened the drawer of the bedside table from curiosity, she had found the crystal stopper there again. Lupin was no longer to be excited by these miraculous incidents. He simply said to himself, so it's been brought back. And the person who brought it back and who enters this house by some unexplained means considered, as I did, that the stopper ought not to disappear. And yet D'Aubrec, who knows that he is being spied upon to his very bedroom, has once more left the stopper in a drawer, as though he attached no importance to it at all. Now what is one to make of that? Though Lupin did not make anything of it, nevertheless he could not escape certain arguments, certain associations of ideas that gave him the same vague foretaste of light which one receives on approaching the outlet of a tunnel. It is inevitable, as the case stands, he thought, that there must soon be an encounter between myself and the others. From that moment I shall be master of the situation. 5 days passed, during which Lupin did not glean the slightest particular. On the 6th day D'Aubrec received a visit, in the small hours, from a gentleman, Leblanc the deputy, who, like his colleagues, dragged himself at his feet in despair and, when all was done, handed him 20,000 francs. 2 more days. And then, one night, posted on the landing of the 2nd floor, Lupin heard the creaking of a door, the front door, as he perceived, which led from the hall into the garden. In the darkness he distinguished, or rather divined, the presence of 2 persons, who climbed the stairs and stopped on the 1st floor, outside D'Aubrec's bedroom. What were they doing there? It was not possible to enter the room, because D'Aubrec bolted his door every night. Then what were they hoping? Manifestly, a handiwork of some kind was being performed, as Lupin discovered from the dull sounds of rubbing against the door. Then words, uttered almost beneath a whisper, reached him. Is it all right? Yes, quite, but, all the same, we'd better put it off till tomorrow, because... Lupin did not hear the end of the sentence. The men were already groping their way downstairs. The hall door was closed, very gently, and then the gate. It's curious, say what one likes, thought Lupin, Here is a house in which Dordrecht carefully conceals his rascalities and is on his guard, not without good reason, against spies, and everybody walks in and out as in a booth at a fair. Victoire lets me in. The portress admits the emissaries of the police. That's well and good. But who is playing false in these people's favor? Are we to suppose that they are acting alone? But what fearlessness! And how well they know their way about. In the afternoon, during Dordrecht's absence, he examined the door of the first-floor bedroom. And, at the first glance, he understood. One of the lower panels had been skillfully cut out and was only held in place by invisible tacks. The people, therefore, who had done this work were the same who had acted at his two places, in the Rue Matignon and the Rue Chateaubriand. He also found that the work dated back to an earlier period and that, as in his case, the opening had been prepared beforehand, in anticipation of favorable circumstances or of some immediate need. The day did not seem long to Lupin. Knowledge was at hand. Not only would he discover the manner in which his adversaries employed those little openings, which were apparently unemployable, since they did not allow a person to reach the upper bolts, but he would learn who the ingenious and energetic adversaries were with whom he repeatedly and inevitably found himself confronted. One incident annoyed him. In the evening, Dordrecht, who had complained of feeling tired at dinner, came home at 10 o'clock and, contrary to his usual custom, pushed the bolts of the hall door. In that case, how would the others be able to carry out their plan and go to Dordrecht's room? Lupin waited for an hour after Dordrecht put out his light. Then he went down to the deputy's study, opened one of the windows ajar and returned to the third floor and fixed his rope ladder so that, in case of need, he could reach the study without passing through the house. Lastly, he resumed his post on the second-floor landing. He did not have to wait long. An hour earlier than on the previous night, someone tried to open the hall door. When the attempt failed, a few minutes of absolute silence followed, and Lupin was beginning to think that the men had abandoned the idea, when he gave a sudden start. Someone had passed, without the least sound to interrupt the silence. He would not have known it, so utterly were the thing's steps deadened by the stair carpet, if the baluster rail, which he himself held in his hand, had not shaken slightly. Someone was coming upstairs, and, as the ascent continued, Lupin became aware of the uncanny feeling that he heard nothing more than before. He knew, because of the rail, that a thing was coming and he could count the number of steps climbed by noting each vibration of the rail. But no other indication gave him that dim sensation of presence which we feel in distinguishing movements which we do not see, in perceiving sounds which we do not hear. And yet a blacker darkness ought to have taken shape within the darkness, and something ought, at least, to modify the quality of the silence. No, he might well have believed that there was no one there. And Lupin, in spite of himself and against the evidence of his reason, ended by believing it. For the rail no longer moved, and he thought that he might have been the sport of an illusion. And this lasted a long time. He hesitated, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to suppose. But an odd circumstance impressed him. A clock struck 2. He recognized the chime of Dordrecht's clock. And the chime was that of a clock from which one is not separated by the obstacle of a door. Lupin slipped down the stairs and went to the door. It was closed, but there was a space on the left, at the bottom, a space left by the removal of the little panel. He listened. Dordrecht, at that moment, turned in his bed, and his breathing was resumed, evenly and a little stertorously. And Lupin plainly heard the sound of rumpling garments. Beyond a doubt, the thing was there, fumbling and feeling through the clothes which Dordrecht had laid beside his bed. Now, thought Lupin, we shall learn something. But how the deuce did the beggar get in? Has he managed to draw the bolts and open the door? But, if so, why did he make the mistake of shutting it again? Not for a second. A curious anomaly in a man like Lupin, an anomaly to be explained only by the uncanny feeling which the whole adventure produced in him. Not for a second did he suspect the very simple truth which was about to be revealed to him. Continuing his way down, he crouched on one of the bottom steps of the staircase, thus placing himself between the door of the bedroom and the hall door, on the road which Dordrecht's enemy must inevitably take in order to join his accomplices. He questioned the darkness with an unspeakable anguish. He was on the point of unmasking that enemy of Dordrecht's, who was also his own adversary. He would thwart his plans, and the booty captured from Dordrecht he would capture in his turn. While Dordrecht slept and while the accomplices lurking behind the hall door or outside the garden gate vainly awaited their leader's return. And that return took place. Lupin knew it by the renewed vibration of the balusters. And, once more, with every sense strained and every nerve on edge, he strove to discern the mysterious thing that was coming toward him. He suddenly realized it when only a few yards away. He himself, hidden in a still darker recess, could not be seen. And what he saw, in the very vaguest manner, was approaching stair by stair, with infinite precautions, holding on to each separate baluster. "Whom the devil have I to do with?" said Lupin to himself, while his heart thumped inside his chest. The catastrophe was hastened. A careless movement on Lupin's part was observed by the stranger, who stopped short. Lupin was afraid lest the other should turn back and take to flight. He sprang at the adversary and was stupefied at encountering nothing but space and knocking against the stair rail without seizing the form which he saw. But he at once rushed forward, crossed the best part of the hall and caught up his antagonist just as he was reaching the door opening on the garden. There was a cry of fright, answered by other cries on the further side of the door. "Oh, hang it. What's this?" muttered Lupin, whose arms had closed, in the dark, round a little, tiny, trembling, whimpering thing. Suddenly understanding, he stood for a moment motionless and dismayed, at a loss what to do with his conquered prey. But the others were shouting and stamping outside the door. Thereupon, dreading lest Dobreck should wake up, he slipped the little thing under his jacket, against his chest, stopped the crying with his handkerchief rolled into a ball and hurried up the 3 flights of stairs. "Here," he said to Victoire, who woke with a start. "I've brought you the indomitable chief of our enemies, the Hercules of the gang. Have you a feeding bottle about you?" He put down in the easy chair a child of 6 or 7 years of age, the tiniest little fellow in a grey jersey and a knitted woolen cap, whose pale and exquisitely pretty features were streaked with the tears that streamed from the terrified eyes. "Where did you pick that up?" asked Victoire, aghast. "At the foot of the stairs, as it was coming out of Dobreck's bedroom," replied Lupin, feeling the jersey in the hope that the child had brought a booty of some kind from that room. Victoire was stirred to pity. "Poor little dear. Look, he's trying not to cry. Oh, saints above, his hands are like ice. Don't be afraid, sonny, we shan't hurt you. The gentleman's all right." "Yes," said Lupin, "the gentleman's quite all right, but there's another very wicked gentleman who'll wake up if they go on making such a rumpus outside the hall door. Do you hear them, Victoire? Who is it?" "The satellites of our young Hercules, the indomitable leader's gang." "Well," stammered Victoire, utterly unnerved. "Well, as I don't want to be caught in the trap, I shall start by clearing out. Are you coming, Hercules?" He rolled the child in a blanket, so that only its head remained outside, gagged its mouth as gently as possible, and made Victoire fasten it to his shoulders. "See, Hercules, we're having a game. You never thought you'd find gentlemen to play piquet-back with you at 3 o'clock in the morning. Come, whoosh, let's fly away. You don't get giddy, I hope." He stepped across the window ledge and set foot on one of the rungs of the ladder. He was in the garden in a minute. He had never ceased hearing and now heard more plainly still the blows that were being struck upon the front door. He was astounded that Dobreck was not awakened by so violent a din. "If I don't put a stop to this, they'll spoil everything," he said to himself. He stood in an angle of the house, invisible in the darkness, and measured the distance between himself and the gate. The gate was open. To his right, he saw the steps, on the top of which the people were flinging themselves about. To his left, the building occupied by the portress. The woman had come out of her lodge and was standing near the people, entreating them. "Oh, do be quiet, do be quiet. He'll come." "Capital," said Lupin. "The good woman is an accomplice of these as well. By jingo, what a pluralist!" He rushed across to her and, taking her by the scruff of the neck, hissed, "Go and tell them I've got the child. They can come and fetch it at my place, Rue Chateaubriand." A little way off, in the avenue, stood a taxi which Lupin presumed to be engaged by the gang. Speaking authoritatively, as though he were one of the accomplices, he stepped into the cab and told the man to drive him home. "Well," he said to the child, "that wasn't much of a shake-up, was it? What do you say to going to bye-bye on the gentleman's bed?" As his servant, Akil, was asleep, Lupin made the little chap comfortable and stroked his hair for him. The child seemed numbed. His poor face was as though petrified into a stiff expression made up, at one and the same time, of fear and the wish not to show fear, of the longing to scream and a pitiful effort not to scream. "Cry, my pet, cry," said Lupin. "It'll do you good to cry." The child did not cry, but the voice was so gentle and so kind that he relaxed his tense muscles. And, now that his eyes were calmer and his mouth less contorted, Lupin, who was examining him closely, found something that he recognized, an undoubted resemblance. This again confirmed certain facts which he suspected and which he had for some time been linking in his mind. Indeed, unless he was mistaken, the position was becoming very different and he would soon assume the direction of events. After that, a ring at the bell followed, at once, by two others, sharp ones. "Hello," said Lupin to the child. "Here's Mummy come to fetch you. Don't move." He ran and opened the door. A woman entered, wildly. "My son," she screamed. "My son. Where is he?" "In my room," said Lupin. Without asking more, thus proving that she knew the way, she rushed to the bedroom. "As I thought," muttered Lupin. The youngish woman with the grey hair, Dobrek's friend and enemy. He walked to the window and looked through the curtains. Two men were striding up and down the opposite pavement, the Growler and the Masher. "And they are not even hiding themselves," he said to himself. "That's a good sign. They consider that they can't do without me any longer and that they've got to obey the governor. There remains the pretty lady with the grey hair. That will be more difficult. It's you and I now, Mummy." He found the mother and the boy clasped in each other's arms, and the mother, in a great state of alarm, her eyes moist with tears, was saying, "You're not hurt? You're sure? Oh, how frightened you must have been, my poor little Jacques." "A fine little fellow," said Lupin. She did not reply. She was feeling the child's jersey, as Lupin had done, no doubt to see if he had succeeded in his nocturnal mission, and she questioned him in a whisper. "No, Mummy," said the child. "No, really." She kissed him fondly and petted him, until, in a little while, the child, worn out with fatigue and excitement, fell asleep. She remained leaning over him for a long time. She herself seemed very much worn out and in need of rest. Lupin did not disturb her contemplation. He looked at her anxiously, with an attention which she did not perceive, and he noticed the wider rings round her eyes and the deeper marks of wrinkles. Yet he considered her handsomer than he had thought, with that touching beauty which habitual suffering gives to certain faces that are more human, more sensitive than others. She wore so sad an expression that, in a burst of instinctive sympathy, he went up to her and said, "I do not know what your plans are, but, whatever they may be, you stand in need of help. You cannot succeed alone." "I am not alone. The two men outside, I know them. They are no good. I beseech you, make use of me. You remember the other evening, at the theater, in the private box? You were on the point of speaking. Do not hesitate today." She turned her eyes on him, looked at him long and fixedly and, as though unable to escape that opposing will, she said, "What do you know exactly? What do you know about me?" "There are many things that I do not know. I do not know your name. But I know." She interrupted him with a gesture, and, resolutely, in her turn, dominating the man who was compelling her to speak. "It doesn't matter," she exclaimed. "What you know, after all, is not much and is of no importance. But what are your plans? You offer me your help. With what view? For what work? You have flung yourself headlong into this business. I have been unable to undertake anything without meeting you on my path. You must be contemplating some aim." "What aim? What aim? Upon my word, it seems to me that my conduct—" "No, no," she said, emphatically. "No phrases. What you and I want is certainties, and, to achieve them, absolute frankness. I will set you the example. M. Dobrek possesses a thing of unparalleled value, not in itself, but for what it represents. That thing you know. You have twice held it in your hands. I have twice taken it from you. Well, I am entitled to believe that, when you tried to obtain possession of it, you meant to use the power which you attribute to it and to use it to your own advantage. What makes you say that? Yes, you meant to use it to forward your schemes, in the interest of your own affairs, in accordance with your habits as a burglar and a swindler," said Lupin, completing the sentence for her. She did not protest. He tried to read her secret thoughts in the depths of her eyes. What did she want with him? What was she afraid of? If she mistrusted him, Had he not also reasons to mistrust that woman who had twice taken the crystal stopper from him to restore it to Dordrecht? Mortal enemy of Dordrecht's though she were, up to what point did she remain subject to that man's will? By surrendering himself to her, did he not risk surrendering himself to Dordrecht? And yet he had never looked upon graver eyes nor a more honest face. Without further hesitation, he stated, "My object is simple enough. It is the release of my friends Gilbert and Vautrin. Is that true? Is that true?" she exclaimed, quivering all over and questioning him with an anxious glance. "If you knew me, I do know you. I know who you are. For months, I have taken part in your life, without your suspecting it, and yet, for certain reasons, I still doubt," he said, in a more decisive tone. "You do not know me. If you knew me, you would know that there can be no peace for me before my two companions have escaped the awful fate that awaits them." She rushed at him, took him by the shoulders and positively distraught, said, "What? What did you say? The awful fate? Then you believe? You believe?" "I really believe," said Lupin, who felt how greatly this threat upset her. "I really believe that, if I am not in time, Gilbert and Vautrin are done for." "Be quiet! Be quiet!" she cried, clutching him fiercely. "Be quiet! You mustn't say that. There is no reason. It's just you who suppose. It's not only I, it's Gilbert as well." "What? Gilbert? How do you know?" "From himself. From him. Yes, from Gilbert, who has no hope left but in me. From Gilbert, who knows that only one man in the world can save him and who, a few days ago, sent me a despairing appeal from prison. Here is his letter." She snatched the paper greedily and read in stammering accents. "Help, Governor! I am frightened. I am frightened." She dropped the letter. Her hands fluttered in space. It was as though her staring eyes beheld the sinister vision which had already so often terrified Lupin. She gave a scream of horror, tried to rise and fainted. Chapter 5. The 27. The child was sleeping peacefully on the bed. The mother did not move from the sofa on which Lupin had laid her, but her easier breathing and the blood which was now returning to her face announced her impending recovery from her swoon. He observed that she wore a wedding ring. Seeing a locket hanging from her bodice, he stooped and, turning it, found a miniature photograph representing a man of about 40 and a lad, a stripling rather, in a schoolboy's uniform. He studied the fresh, young face set in curly hair. "It's as I thought," he said. "Ah, poor woman." The hand which he took between his grew warmer by degrees. The eyes opened, then closed again. She murmured, "Zach, do not distress yourself. It's all right, he's asleep." She recovered consciousness entirely. But, as she did not speak, Lupin put questions to her, to make her feel a gradual need of unbosoming herself. And he said, pointing to the locket, "The schoolboy is Gilbert, isn't he?" "Yes," she said. "And Gilbert is your son?" She gave a shiver and whispered, "Yes, Gilbert is my son, my eldest son." So she was the mother of Gilbert the prisoner at the Santee, relentlessly pursued by the authorities and now awaiting his trial for murder. Lupin continued, "And the other portrait? My husband? Your husband?" "Yes, he died 3 years ago." She was now sitting up. Life quivered in her veins once more, together with the horror of living and the horror of all the ghastly things that threatened her. Lupin went on to ask, "What was your husband's name?" She hesitated a moment and answered, "Murgy," he exclaimed. "Victorian Murgy the deputy?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Lupin remembered the incident and the stir which it had caused. 3 years ago, Murgy the deputy had blown out his brains in the lobby of the chamber, without leaving a word of explanation behind him, and no one had ever discovered the slightest reason for that suicide. "Do you know the reason?" asked Lupin, completing his thought aloud. "Yes, I know it. Gilbert, perhaps?" "No. Gilbert had disappeared for some years, turned out of doors and cursed by my husband. It was a very great sorrow. But there was another motive." "What was that?" asked Lupin. But it was not necessary for Lupin to put further questions. Madame Murgy could keep silent no longer and, slowly at first, with all the anguish of that past which had to be called up, she told her story. 25 years ago, when my name was Clarice de Selle and my parents living, I knew 3 young men at Nice. Their names will at once give you an insight into the present tragedy. They were Alexis Daubrec, Victorien Mergy, and Louis Prasville. The three were old acquaintances, had gone to college in the same year and served in the same regiment. Prasville, at that time, was in love with a singer at the opera house at Nice. The two others, Mergy and Daubrec, were in love with me. I shall be brief as regards all this and, for the rest, as regards the whole story, for the facts tell their own tale. I fell in love with Victorien Mergy from the first. Perhaps I was wrong not to declare myself at once. But true love is always timid, hesitating and shy, and I did not announce my choice until I felt quite certain and quite free. Unfortunately, that period of waiting, so delightful for those who cherish a secret passion, had permitted Daubrec to hope. His anger was something horrible. Maurice Mergy stopped for a few seconds and resumed, in a stifled voice. I shall never forget it. The three of us were in the drawing room. Oh, I can hear even now the terrible words of threat and hatred which he uttered. Victorien was absolutely astounded. He had never seen his friend like this, with that repugnant face, that bestial expression. Yes, the expression of a wild beast. Daubrec ground his teeth. He stamped his feet. His bloodshot eyes, he did not wear spectacles in those days, rolled in their sockets, and he kept on saying, I shall be revenged. I shall be revenged. Oh, you don't know what I am capable of. I shall wait 10 years, 20 years, if necessary. But it will come like a thunderbolt. Ah, you don't know. To be revenged. To do harm, for harm's sake. What joy. I was born to do harm. And you will both beseech my mercy on your knees. On your knees. Yes, on your knees. At that moment, my father entered the room, and, with his assistants and the footmen's, Victorien Mergy flung the loathsome creature out of doors. 6 weeks later, I married Victorien. And Daubrec? Asked Lupin, interrupting her. Did he not try? No, but on our wedding day, Louis Prasville, who acted as my husband's best man in defiance of Daubrec's opposition, went home to find the girl he loved, the opera singer, dead, strangled. What? Said Lupin, with a start. Had Daubrec? It was known that Daubrec had been persecuting her with his attentions for some days, but nothing more was known. It was impossible to discover who had gone in or out during Prasville's absence. There was not a trace found of any kind. Nothing, absolutely nothing. But Prasville. There was no doubt of the truth in Prasville's mind or ours. Daubrec had tried to run away with the girl, perhaps tried to force her, to hustle her and, in the course of the struggle, maddened, losing his head, caught her by the throat and killed her, perhaps without knowing what he was doing. But there was no evidence of all this, and Daubrec was not even molested. And what became of him next? For some years we heard nothing of him. We knew only that he had lost all his money gambling and that he was traveling in America. And, in spite of myself, I forgot his anger and his threats and was only too ready to believe that he had ceased to love me and no longer harbored his schemes of revenge. Besides, I was so happy that I did not care to think of anything but my happiness, my love, my husband's political career, the health of my son Antoine. Antoine. Yes, Antoine is Gilbert's real name. The unhappy boy has at least succeeded in concealing his identity. Lupin asked, with some hesitation. At what period did Gilbert begin? I cannot tell you exactly. Gilbert. I prefer to call him that and not to pronounce his real name. Gilbert, as a child, was what he is today, lovable, liked by everybody, charming, but lazy and unruly. When he was 15, we put him to a boarding school in one of the suburbs, with the deliberate object of not having him too much at home. After 2 years' time, he was expelled from school and sent back to us. Why? Because of his conduct. The masters had discovered that he used to slip out at night and also that he would disappear for weeks at a time, while pretending to be at home with us. What used he to do? Amuse himself backing horses, spending his time in cafes and public dancing rooms. Then he had money. Yes. Who gave it him? His evil genius. The man who, secretly, unknown to his parents, enticed him away from school. The man who led him astray, who corrupted him, who took him from us, who taught him to lie, to waste his substance and to steal. Daubrec. Daubrec. Maurice Mergy put her hands together to hide the blushes on her forehead. She continued, in her tired voice. Daubrec had taken his revenge. On the day after my husband turned our unhappy child out of the house, Dobrecht sent us a most cynical letter in which he revealed the odious part which he had played in the machinations by which he had succeeded in depraving our son. And he went on to say, the reformatory, one of these days. Later on, the assize court. And then, let us hope and trust, the scaffold. Lupin exclaimed. What? Did Dobrecht plot the present business? No, no, that is only an accident. The hateful prophecy was just a wish which he expressed. But oh, how it terrified me. I was ailing at the time. My other son, my little Jacques, had just been born. And every day we heard of some fresh misdeed of Gilbert's, forgeries, swindles, so much so that we spread the news, in our immediate surroundings, of his departure for abroad, followed by his death. Life was a misery, and it became still more so when the political storm burst in which my husband was to meet his death. What do you mean? A word will be enough. My husband's name was on the list of the 27. Ah! The veil was suddenly lifted from Lupin's eyes, and he saw, as in a flash of lightning, a whole legion of things which, until then, had been hidden in the darkness. Clarice Murgy continued, in a firmer voice. Yes, his name was on it, but by mistake, by a piece of incredible ill luck of which he was the victim. It is true that Victorien Murgy was a member of the committee appointed to consider the question of the Two Seas Canal. It is true that he voted with the members who were in favor of the company's scheme. He was even paid. Yes, I tell you so plainly, and I will mention the sum. He was paid 15,000 francs. But he was paid on behalf of another, of one of his political friends, a man in whom he had absolute confidence and of whom he was the blind, unconscious tool. He thought he was showing his friend a kindness, and it proved his own undoing. It was not until the day after the suicide of the chairman of the company and the disappearance of the secretary, the day on which the affair of the canal was published in the papers, with its whole series of swindles and abominations, that my husband knew that a number of his fellow members had been bribed and learnt that the mysterious list, of which people suddenly began to speak, mentioned his name with theirs and with the names of other deputies, leaders of parties and influential politicians. Oh, what awful days those were! Would the list be published? Would his name come out? The torture of it! You remember the mad excitement in the chamber, the atmosphere of terror and denunciation that prevailed. Who on the list? Nobody could say. It was known to be in existence, and that was all. 2 names were sacrificed to public odium. 2 men were swept away by the storm. And it remained unknown where the denunciation came from and in whose hands the incriminating documents were. Dobrecht, suggested Lupin. No, no, cried Madame Murgy. Dobrecht was nothing at that time. He had not yet appeared upon the scene. No, don't you remember? The truth came out suddenly through the very man who was keeping it back. Germinos, the ex-minister of justice, a cousin of the chairman of the canal company. As he lay dying of consumption, he wrote from his sickbed to the prefect of police, bequeathing him that list of names, which, he said, would be found, after his death, in an iron chest in the corner of his room. The house was surrounded by police, and the prefect took up his quarters by the sick man's bedside. Germinos died. The chest was opened and found to be empty. Dobrecht, this time, Lupin declared. Yes, Dobrecht, said Madame Murgy, whose excitement was momentarily increasing. Alexis Dobrecht, who, for 6 months, disguised beyond recognition, had acted as Germinos' secretary. It does not matter how he discovered that Germinos was the possessor of the paper in question. The fact remains that he broke open the chest on the night before the death. So much was proved at the inquiry, and Dobrecht's identity was established. But he was not arrested. What would have been the use? They knew well enough that he must have deposited the list in a place of safety. His arrest would have involved a scandal, the reopening of the whole case. So they made terms. Lupin laughed. That's funny, making terms with Dobrecht. Yes, very funny, said Madame Murgy, bitterly. During this time he acted and without delay, shamelessly, making straight for the goal. A week after the theft, he went to the Chamber of Deputies, asked for my husband and bluntly demanded 30,000 francs of him, to be paid within 24 hours. If not, he threatened him with exposure and disgrace. My husband knew the man he was dealing with, knew him to be implacable and filled with relentless hatred. He lost his head and shot himself. How absurd! Lupin could not help saying. How absurd. Dobrecht possesses a list of 27 names. To give up any one of those names he is obliged, if he would have his accusation believed, to publish the list itself, that is to say, to part with the document, or at least a photograph of it. Well, in so doing, he creates a scandal, it is true, but he deprives himself, at the same time, of all further means of levying blackmail. Yes and no, she said. How do you know? Through Dobrecht himself. The villain came to see me and cynically told me of his interview with my husband and the words that had passed between them. Well, there is more than that list, more than that famous bit of paper on which the secretary put down the names and the amounts paid, and to which, you will remember, the chairman of the company, before dying, affixed his signature in letters of blood. There is more than that. There are certain less positive proofs, which the people interested do not know of. The correspondence between the chairman and the secretary, between the chairman and his counsel, and so on. Of course, the list scribbled on the bit of paper is the only evidence that counts. It is the one incontestable proof which it would be no good copying or even photographing, for its genuineness can be tested most absolutely. But, all the same, the other proofs are dangerous. They have already been enough to do away with 2 deputies. And Dobrecht is marvelously clever at turning this fact to account. He selects his victim, frightens him out of his senses, points out to him the inevitable scandal, and the victim pays the required sum. Or else he kills himself, as my husband did. Do you understand now? Yes, said Lupin. And, in the silence that followed, he drew a mental picture of Dobrecht's life. He saw him the owner of that list, using his power, gradually emerging from the shadow, lavishly squandering the money which he extorted from his victims, securing his election as a district councillor and deputy, holding sway by dint of threats and terror, unpunished, invulnerable, unattackable, feared by the government, which would rather submit to his orders than declare war upon him, respected by the judicial authorities, so powerful, in a word, that Prasville had been appointed Secretary General of Police, over the heads of all who had prior claims, for the sole reason that he hated Dobrecht with a personal hatred. And you saw him again? He asked. I saw him again. I had to. My husband was dead, but his honor remained untouched. Nobody suspected the truth. In order at least to defend the name which he left me, I accepted my first interview with Dobrecht. Your first? Yes, for there have been others. Many others, she said, in a strained voice. Yes, many others at the theatre, or in the evening, at Enghien, or else in Paris, at night, for I was ashamed to meet that man and I did not want people to know it. But it was necessary. A duty more imperative than any other commanded it. The duty of avenging my husband. She bent over Lupin and, eagerly. Yes, revenge has been the motive of my conduct and the sole preoccupation of my life. To avenge my husband, to avenge my ruined son, to avenge myself for all the harm that he has done me. I had no other dream, no other object in life. That is what I wanted, to see that man crushed, reduced to poverty, to tears, as though he still knew how to cry, sobbing in the throes of despair. You wanted his death, said Lupin, remembering the scene between them in Dobrecht's study. No, not his death. I have often thought of it. I have even raised my arm to strike him. But what would have been the good? He must have taken his precautions. The paper would remain. And then there is no revenge in killing a man. My hatred went further than that. It demanded his ruin, his downfall. And, to achieve that, there was but one way, to cut his claws. Dobrecht, deprived of the document that gives him his immense power, ceases to exist. It means immediate bankruptcy and disaster, under the most wretched conditions. That is what I have sought. But Dobrecht must have been aware of your intentions. Certainly. And, I assure you, those were strange meetings of ours. I watching him closely, trying to guess his secret behind his actions and his words, and he, said Lupin, finishing Clarice's thought, lying in wait for the prey which he desires, for the woman whom he has never ceased to love, whom he loves, and whom he covets with all his might and with all his furious passion. She lowered her head and said, simply, yes. A strange duel indeed was that which brought face to face those two beings separated by so many implacable things. How unbridled must Dorbrecht's passion be for him to risk that perpetual threat of death and to introduce to the privacy of his house this woman whose life he had shattered. But also how absolutely safe he must feel himself. "And your search ended, how?" asked Lupin. "My search," she replied, "long remained without fruit. You know the methods of investigation which you have followed and which the police have followed on their side. Well, I myself employed them, years before either of you did, and in vain. I was beginning to despair. Then, one day, when I had gone to see Dorbrecht in his villa at Enghien, I picked up under his writing table a letter which he had begun to write, crumpled up and thrown into the wastepaper basket. It consisted of a few lines in bad English, and I was able to read this: "Empty the crystal within, so as to leave a void which it is impossible to suspect." Perhaps I should not have attached to this sentence all the importance which it deserved, if Dorbrecht, who was out in the garden, had not come running in and begun to turn out the wastepaper basket, with an eagerness which was very significant. He gave me a suspicious look. "There was a letter there," he said. I pretended not to understand. He did not insist, but his agitation did not escape me, and I continued my quest in this direction. A month later, I discovered, among the ashes in the drawing-room fireplace, the torn half of an English invoice. I gathered that a Stourbridge glass-blower, of the name of John Howard, had supplied Dorbrecht with a crystal bottle made after a model. The word crystal struck me at once. I went to Stourbridge, got round the foreman of the glassworks and learnt that the stopper of this bottle had been hollowed out inside, in accordance with the instruction in the order, so as to leave a cavity, the existence of which would escape observation. Lupin nodded his head. "The thing tallies beyond a doubt. Nevertheless, it did not seem to me that, even under the gilt layer. And then the hiding place would be very tiny. Tiny, but large enough," she said. On my return from England, I went to the police office to see Prasville, whose friendship for me had remained unchanged. I did not hesitate to tell him, first, the reasons which had driven my husband to suicide and, secondly, the object of revenge which I was pursuing. When I informed him of my discoveries, he jumped for joy, and I felt that his hatred for Dorbrecht was as strong as ever. I learnt from him that the list was written on a slip of exceedingly thin foreign post-paper, which, when rolled up into a sort of pellet, would easily fit into an exceedingly limited space. Neither he nor I had the least hesitation. We knew the hiding place. We agreed to act independently of each other, while continuing to correspond in secret. I put him in touch with Clemence, the portress in the Square Lamartine, who was entirely devoted to me. "But less so to Prasville," said Lupin, "for I can prove that she betrays him. Now perhaps, but not at the start, and the police searches were numerous. It was at that time, 10 months ago, that Gilbert came into my life again. A mother never loses her love for her son, whatever he may do, whatever he may have done. And then Gilbert has such a way with him, well, you know him. He cried, 'Kiss my little Jacques,' his brother, and I forgave him." She stopped and, weary-voiced, with her eyes fixed on the floor, continued, "Would to heaven that I had not forgiven him. Ah, if that hour could but return, how readily I should find the horrible courage to turn him away. My poor child, it was I who ruined him, and, pensively, I should have had that or any sort of courage, if he had been as I pictured him to myself and as he himself told me that he had long been, bearing the marks of vice and dissipation, coarse, deteriorated. But, though he was utterly changed in appearance, so much so that I could hardly recognize him, there was, from the point of view of, how shall I put it, from the moral point of view, an undoubted improvement. You had helped him, lifted him, and, though his mode of life was hateful to me, nevertheless he retained a certain self-respect, a sort of underlying decency that showed itself on the surface once more. He was gay, careless, happy, and he used to talk of you with such affection." She picked her words, betraying her embarrassment, not daring, in Lupin's presence, to condemn the line of life which Gilbert had selected and yet unable to speak in favor of it. "What happened next?" asked Lupin. "I saw him very often. He would come to me by stealth, or else I went to him and we would go for walks in the country. In this way, I was gradually induced to tell him our story, of his father's suicide and the object which I was pursuing. He at once took fire. He too wanted to avenge his father and, by stealing the crystal stopper, to avenge himself on Dobrecht for the harm which he had done him. His first idea, from which, I am bound to tell you, he never swerved, was to arrange with you. Well, then, cried Lupin, he ought to have. Yes, I know, and I was of the same opinion. Unfortunately, my poor Gilbert, you know how weak he is, was under the influence of one of his comrades. Vautrin. Yes, Vautrin, a saturnine spirit, full of bitterness and envy, an ambitious, unscrupulous, gloomy, crafty man, who had acquired a great empire over my son. Gilbert made the mistake of confiding in him and asking his advice. That was the origin of all the mischief. Vautrin convinced him and convinced me as well that it would be better if we acted by ourselves. He studied the business, took the lead and finally organized the Enghien expedition and, under your direction, the burglary at the Villa Marie-Therese, which Prasville and his detectives had been unable to search thoroughly because of the active watch maintained by Leonard the valet. It was a mad scheme. We ought either to have trusted in your experience entirely, or else to have left you out altogether, taking the risk of fatal mistakes and dangerous hesitations. But we could not help ourselves. Vautrin ruled us. I agreed to meet Dobrecht at the theatre. During this time the thing took place. When I came home, at 12 o'clock at night, I heard the terrible result. Leonard murdered, my son arrested. I at once received an intuition of the future. Dobrecht's appalling prophecy was being realized. It meant trial and sentence. And this through my fault, through the fault of me, the mother, who had driven my son toward the abyss from which nothing could extricate him now. Clarisse wrung her hands and shivered from head to foot. What suffering can compare with that of a mother trembling for the head of her son? Stirred with pity, Lupin said, "We shall save him. Of that there is not the shadow of a doubt. But it is necessary that I should know all the details. Finish your story, please. How did you know, on the same night, what had happened at Enghien?" She mastered herself and, with a face wrung with fevered anguish, replied, "Through two of your accomplices, or rather two accomplices of Vautrin, to whom they were wholly devoted and who had chosen them to row the boats. The two men outside, the Growler and the Masher. Yes, on your return from the villa, when you landed after being pursued on the lake by the commissary of police, you said a few words to them, by way of explanation, as you went to your car. Mad with fright, they rushed to my place, where they had been before, and told me the hideous news. Gilbert was in prison. Oh, what an awful night! What was I to do? Look for you? Certainly, and implore your assistance. But where was I to find you? It was then that the two whom you call the Growler and the Masher, driven into a corner by circumstances, decided to tell me of the part played by Vautrin, his ambitions, his plan, which had long been ripening. To get rid of me, I suppose, said Lupin, with a grin. Yes, as Gilbert possessed your complete confidence, Vautrin watched him and, in this way, got to know all the places which you live at. A few days more and, owning the crystal stopper, holding the list of the 27, inheriting all Dobrecht's power, he would have delivered you to the police, without compromising a single member of your gang, which he looked upon as thenceforth his. The ass, muttered Lupin, a muddler like that. And he added, so the panels of the doors were cut out by his instructions, in anticipation of the contest on which he was embarking against you and against Dobrecht, at whose house he did the same thing. He had under his orders a sort of acrobat, an extraordinarily thin dwarf, who was able to wriggle through those apertures and who thus detected all your correspondence and all your secrets. That is what his two friends revealed to me. I at once conceived the idea of saving my elder son by making use of his brother, my little Jacques, who is himself so slight and so intelligent, so plucky, as you have seen. We set out that night. Acting on the information of my companions, I went to Gilbert's rooms and found the keys of your flat in the Rue Matignon, where it appeared that you were to sleep. Unfortunately, I changed my mind on the way and thought much less of asking for your help than of recovering the crystal stopper, which, if it had been discovered at Enghien, must obviously be at your flat. I was right in my calculations. In a few minutes, my little Jacques, who had slipped into your bedroom, brought it to me. I went away quivering with hope, mistress in my turn of the talisman, keeping it to myself. Without telling Prasville, I had absolute power over Dobrecht. I could make him do all that I wanted. He would become the slave of my will and, instructed by me, would take every step in Gilbert's favor and obtain that he should be given the means of escape or else that he should not be sentenced. It meant my boy's safety. Well, Clarice rose from her seat, with a passionate movement of her whole being, leant over Lupin and said, in a hollow voice, "There was nothing in that piece of crystal. Nothing. Do you understand? No paper, no hiding place. The whole expedition to Enghien was futile. The murder of Leonard was useless. The arrest of my son was useless. All my efforts were useless. But why? 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 Because what you stole from Dobreck was not the stopper made by his instructions, but the stopper which was sent to John Howard, the Stourbridge glassworker, to serve as a model. If Lupin had not been in the presence of so deep a grief, he could not have refrained from one of those satirical outbursts with which the mischievous tricks of fate are wont to inspire him. As it was, he muttered between his teeth, "How stupid!" And still more stupid as Dobreck had been given the warning. "No," she said. "I went to Enghien on the same day. In all that business Dobreck saw and sees nothing but an ordinary burglary, an annexation of his treasures. The fact that you took part in it put him off the scent. Still, the disappearance of the stopper. To begin with, the thing can have had but a secondary importance for him, as it is only the model. How do you know? There is a scratch at the bottom of the stem, and I have made inquiries in England since. Very well. But why did the key of the cupboard from which it was stolen never leave the manservant's possession? And why, in the second place, was it found afterward in the drawer of a table in Dobreck's house in Paris? Of course, Dobreck takes care of it and clings to it in the way in which one clings to the model of any valuable thing. And that is why I replaced the stopper in the cupboard before its absence was noticed. And that also is why, on the second occasion, I made my little Jacques take the stopper from your overcoat pocket and told the portress to put it back in the drawer. Then he suspects nothing. Nothing. He knows that the list is being looked for, but he does not know that Prasville and I are aware of the thing in which he hides it." Lupin had risen from his seat and was walking up and down the room, thinking. Then he stood still beside Clarice and asked, "When all is said, since the Enghien incident, you have not advanced a single step. Not one. I have acted from day to day, led by those two men or leading them, without any definite plan. Or, at least," he said, "without any other plan than that of getting the list of the 27 from Dobreck. Yes, but how? Besides, your tactics made things more difficult for me. It did not take us long to recognize your old servant Victoire in Dobreck's new cook and to discover, from what the portress told us, that Victoire was putting you up in her room, and I was afraid of your schemes. It was you, was it not, who wrote to me to retire from the contest? Yes. You also asked me not to go to the theatre on the vaudeville night. Yes, the portress caught Victoire listening to Dobreck's conversation with me on the telephone, and the masher, who was watching the house, saw you go out. I suspected, therefore, that you would follow Dobreck that evening, and the woman who came here, late one afternoon, was myself. I felt disheartened and wanted to see you, and you intercepted Gilbert's letter. Yes, I recognized his writing on the envelope. But your little Jacques was not with you. No, he was outside, in a motor car, with the masher, who lifted him up to me through the drawing-room window, and he slipped into your bedroom through the opening in the panel. What was in the letter? As ill luck would have it, reproaches. Gilbert accused you of forsaking him, of taking over the business on your own account. In short, it confirmed me in my distrust, and I ran away. Lupin shrugged his shoulders with irritation. What a shocking waste of time, and what a fatality that we were not able to come to an understanding earlier. You and I have been playing at hide-and-seek, laying absurd traps for each other, while the days were passing, precious days beyond repair. You see, she said, shivering. You two are afraid of the future. No, I'm not afraid, cried Lupin. But I am thinking of all the useful work that we could have done by this time, if we had united our efforts. I am thinking of all the mistakes and all the acts of imprudence which we should have been saved, if we had been working together. I am thinking that your attempt tonight to search the clothes which Dobreck was wearing was as vain as the others, and that, at this moment, thanks to our foolish duel, thanks to the din which we raised in his house, Dobreck is warned and will be more on his guard than ever. Clarice Murgy shook her head. No, I don't think that. The noise will not have roused him, for we postponed the attempt for 24 hours so that the portress might put a narcotic in his wine. And she added, slowly, and then, you see, nothing can make Dobreck be more on his guard than he is already. His life is nothing but one mass of precautions against danger. He leaves nothing to chance. Besides, has he not all the trumps in his hand? Lupin went up to her and asked, what do you mean to convey? According to you, is there nothing to hope for on that side? Is there not a single means of attaining our end? Yes, she murmured. There is one only. He noticed her pallor before she had time to hide her face between her hands again. And again a feverish shiver shook her frame. He seemed to understand the reason of her dismay, and, bending toward her, touched by her grief. Please, he said, please answer me openly and frankly. It's for Gilbert's sake, is it not? Though the police, fortunately, have not been able to solve the riddle of his past, though the real name of Vautier's accomplice has not leaked out, there is one man, at least, who knows it. Isn't that so? Dobreck has recognized your son Antoine, through the alias of Gilbert, has he not? Yes, yes. And he promises to save him, doesn't he? He offers you his freedom, his release, his escape, his life. That was what he offered you, was it not, on the night in his study, when you tried to stab him? Yes, yes, that was it. And he makes one condition, does he not? An abominable condition, such as would suggest itself to a wretch like that? I'm right, am I not? Clarice did not reply. She seemed exhausted by her protracted struggle with a man who was gaining ground daily and against whom it was impossible for her to fight. Lupin saw in her the prey conquered in advance, delivered to the victor's whim. Clarice Murgy, the loving wife of that Murgy whom Dobreck had really murdered, the terrified mother of that Gilbert whom Dobreck had led astray, Clarice Murgy, to save her son from the scaffold, must, come what may and however ignominious the position, yield to Dobreck's wishes. She would be the mistress, the wife, the obedient slave of Dobreck, of that monster with the appearance and the ways of a wild beast, that unspeakable person of whom Lupin could not think without revulsion and disgust. Sitting down beside her, gently, with gestures of pity, he made her lift her head and, with his eyes on hers, said, Listen to me. I swear that I will save your son. I swear it. Your son shall not die. Do you understand? There is not a power on earth that can allow your son's head to be touched as long as I am alive. I believe you. I trust your word. Do. It is the word of a man who does not know defeat. I shall succeed. Only, I entreat you to make me an irrevocable promise. What is that? You must not see Dobreck again. I swear it. You must put from your mind any idea, any fear, however obscure, of an understanding between yourself and him, of any sort of bargain. I swear it. She looked at him with an expression of absolute security and reliance. And he, under her gaze, felt the joy of devotion and an ardent longing to restore that woman's happiness, or, at least, to give her the peace and oblivion that heal the worst wounds. Come, he said, in a cheerful tone, rising from his chair. All will yet be well. We have 2 months, 3 months before us. It is more than I need, on condition, of course, that I am unhampered in my movements. And, for that, you will have to withdraw from the contest. You know. How do you mean? Yes, you must disappear for a time. Go and live in the country. Have you no pity for your little Jacques? This sort of thing would end by shattering the poor little man's nerves. And he has certainly earned his rest, haven't you, Hercules? The next day Clarice Murgy, who was nearly breaking down under the strain of events and who herself needed repose, lest she should fall seriously ill, went, with her son, to board with a friend who had a house on the skirt of the forest of Saint-Germain. She felt very weak. Her brain was haunted by visions and her nerves were upset by troubles which the least excitement aggravated. She lived there for some days in a state of physical and mental inertia, thinking of nothing and forbidden to see the papers. One afternoon, while Lupin, changing his tactics, was working out a scheme for kidnapping and confining Dobreck, while the Growler and the Masher, whom he had promised to forgive if he succeeded, were watching the enemy's movements, while the newspapers were announcing the forthcoming trial for murder of Arsène Lupin's 2 accomplices. One afternoon, at 4 o'clock, the telephone bell rang suddenly in the flat in the Rue Chateaubriand. Lupin took down the receiver. Hello! A woman's voice, A breathless voice said, Michel Beaumont. You are speaking to him, madam. To whom have I the honor? Quick, monsieur, come at once. Madame Murgy has taken poison. Lupin did not wait to hear details. He rushed out, sprang into his motorcar and drove to Saint-Germain. Clarice's friend was waiting for him at the door of the bedroom. Dead? He asked. No, she replied. She did not take sufficient. The doctor has just gone. He says she will get over it. And why did she make the attempt? Her son Jacques has disappeared. Carried off. Yes, he was playing just inside the forest. A motorcar was seen pulling up. Then there were screams. Clarice tried to run, but her strength failed and she fell to the ground, moaning, It's he, it's that man. All is lost. She looked like a madwoman. Suddenly, she put a little bottle to her lips and swallowed the contents. What happened next? My husband and I carried her to her room. She was in great pain. How did you know my address? My name? From herself, while the doctor was attending to her. Then I telephoned to you. Has anyone else been told? No, nobody. I know that Clarice has had terrible things to bear, and that she prefers not to be talked about. Can I see her? She is asleep just now, and the doctor has forbidden all excitement. Is the doctor anxious about her? He is afraid of a fit of fever, any nervous strain, an attack of some kind which might cause her to make a fresh attempt on her life. And that would be what is needed to avoid it. A week or a fortnight of absolute quiet, which is impossible as long as her little Jacques. Lupin interrupted her. You think that, if she got her son back? Oh, certainly. There would be nothing more to fear. You're sure? You're sure? Yes, of course you are. Well, when Madame Murgy wakes, tell her from me that I will bring her back her son this evening, before midnight. This evening, before midnight, it's a solemn promise. With these words, Lupin hurried out of the house and, stepping into his car, shouted to the driver, Go to Paris, Square Lamartine, Daubrec the deputies. Chapter 6. The Death Sentence. Lupin's motorcar was not only an office, a writing room furnished with books, stationery, pens, and ink, but also a regular actor's dressing room, containing a complete makeup box, a trunk filled with every variety of wearing apparel, another crammed with properties, umbrellas, walking sticks, scarves, eyeglasses, and so on. In short, a complete set of paraphernalia which enabled him to alter his appearance from top to toe in the course of a drive. The man who rang at Daubrec the deputy's gate at 6 o'clock that evening was a stout, elderly gentleman in a black frock coat, a bowler hat, spectacles, and whiskers. The portress took him to the front door of the house and rang the bell. Victoire appeared. Lupin asked, Can M. Daubrec see Dr. Vernes? M. Daubrec is in his bedroom, and it is rather late. Give him my card, please. He wrote the words, from MME Murgy, in the margin and added, There, he is sure to see me. But, Victoire began, Oh, drop your butts, old dear, do as I say, and don't make such a fuss about it. She was utterly taken aback and stammered, You, is it you? No, it's Louis XIV. And, pushing her into a corner of the hall, Listen. The moment I'm done with him, go up to your room, put your things together anyhow and clear out. What? Do as I tell you. You'll find my car waiting down the avenue. Come, stir your stumps. Announce me. I'll wait in the study. But it's dark in there. Turn on the light. She switched on the electric light and left Lupin alone. It's here, he reflected, as he took a seat, it's here that the crystal stopper lives. Unless Daubrec always keeps it by him. But no, when people have a good hiding place, they make use of it. And this is a capital one, for none of us, so far. Concentrating all his attention, he examined the objects in the room, and he remembered the note which Daubrec wrote to Prasville. Within reach of your hand, my dear Prasville. You touched it, a little more and the trick was done. Nothing seemed to have moved since that day. The same things were lying about on the desk, books, account books, a bottle of ink, a stamp box, pipes, tobacco, things that had been searched and probed over and over again. The bounder, thought Lupin, has organized his business jolly cleverly. It's all dovetailed like a well-made play. In his heart of hearts, though he knew exactly what he had come to do and how he meant to act, Lupin was thoroughly aware of the danger and uncertainty attending his visit to so powerful an adversary. It was quite within the bounds of possibility that D'Orbreck, armed as he was, would remain master of the field and that the conversation would take an absolutely different turn from that which Lupin anticipated. And this prospect angered him somewhat. He drew himself up as he heard a sound of footsteps approaching. D'Orbreck entered. He entered without a word, made a sign to Lupin, who had risen from his chair, to resume his seat and himself sat down at the writing desk, glancing at the card which he held in his hand. Dr. Verns? Yes, Monsieur le Député, Dr. Verns, of Saint-Germain. And I see that you come from Mme Murgy. A patient of yours. A recent patient. I did not know her until I was called in to see her, the other day, in particularly tragic circumstances. Is she ill? Mme Murgy has taken poison. What? D'Orbreck gave a start and he continued, without concealing his distress. What's that you say? Poison. Is she dead? No, the dose was not large enough. If no complications ensue, I consider that Mme Murgy's life is saved. D'Orbreck said nothing and sat silent, with his head turned to Lupin. Is he looking at me? His eyes open or shut? Lupin asked himself. It worried Lupin terribly not to see his adversary's eyes, those eyes hidden by the double obstacle of spectacles and black glasses. Weak, bloodshot eyes, Mme Murgy had told him. How could he follow the secret train of the man's thought without seeing the expression of his face? It was almost like fighting an enemy who wielded an invisible sword. Presently, D'Orbreck spoke. So Mme Murgy's life is saved. And she has sent you to me. I don't quite understand. I hardly know the lady. Now for the ticklish moment, thought Lupin. Have at him. And, in a genial, good-natured and rather shy tone, he said, No, Monsieur le Député, there are cases in which a doctor's duty becomes very complex, very puzzling. And you may think that, in taking this step. However, to cut a long story short, while I was attending Mme Murgy, she made a second attempt to poison herself. Yes, the bottle, unfortunately, had been left within her reach. I snatched it from her. We had a struggle, and, railing in her fever, she said to me, in broken words, He's the man. He's the man. D'Orbreck the deputy. Make him give me back my son. Tell him to, or else I would rather die. Yes, now, tonight. I would rather die. That's what she said, Monsieur le Député. So I thought that I ought to let you know. It is quite certain that, in the lady's highly nervous state of mind. Of course, I don't know the exact meaning of her words. I asked no questions of anybody, obeyed a spontaneous impulse and came straight to you. D'Orbreck reflected for a little while and said, It amounts to this, doctor, that you have come to ask me if I know the whereabouts of this child whom I presume to have disappeared. Is that it? Yes. And, if I did happen to know, you would take him back to his mother. There was a longer pause. Lupin asked himself, Can he by chance have swallowed the story? Is the threat of that death enough? Oh, nonsense, it's out of the question. And yet, he seems to be hesitating. Will you excuse me? Asked D'Orbreck, drawing the telephone, on his writing desk, toward him. I have an urgent message. Certainly, Monsieur le Député. D'Orbreck called out. Hello. 822.19. Please. 822.19. Having repeated the number, he sat without moving. Lupin smiled. The headquarters of police, isn't it? The Secretary General's office. Yes, doctor. How do you know? Oh, as a divisional surgeon, I sometimes have to ring them up. And, within himself, Lupin asked, What the devil does all this mean? The Secretary General is Prasville. Then, what? D'Orbreck put both receivers to his ears and said, Are you 822.19? I want to speak to M. Prasville, the Secretary General. Do you say is not there? Yes, he is. He's always in his office at this time. Tell him it's M. D'Orbreck. M. D'Orbreck the deputy, a most important communication. Perhaps I'm in the way. Lupin suggested. Not at all, doctor, not at all, said D'Orbreck. Besides, what I have to say has a certain bearing on your errand. And, into the telephone. Hello, M. Prasville. Ah, it's you, Prasville, old cock. Why, You seem quite staggered. Yes, you're right. It's an age since you and I met. But, after all, we've never been far away in thought. And I've had plenty of visits from you and your henchmen. In my absence, it's true. Hello. What? Oh, you in a hurry? I beg your pardon. So am I, for that matter. Well, to come to the point, there's a little service I want to do you. Wait, can't you, you brute? You won't regret it. It concerns your renown. Hello. Are you listening? Well, take half a dozen men with you, plainclothes detectives. By preference, you'll find them at the night office. Jump into a taxi, 2 taxis, and come along here as fast as you can. I've got a rare quarry for you, old chapter. One of the upper 10, a lord, a Marquis Napoleon himself, in a word, Arsène Lupin. Lupin sprang to his feet. He was prepared for everything but this. Yet something within him stronger than astonishment, an impulse of his whole nature, made him say, with a laugh, "Oh, well done, well done." D'Aubrec bowed his head, by way of thanks, and muttered, "I haven't quite finished. A little patience, if you don't mind." And he continued, "Hello, Prasville. No, old chap, I'm not humbugging. You'll find Lupin here, with me, in my study. Lupin, who's worrying me like the rest of you? Oh, one more or less makes no difference to me. But, all the same, this one's a bit too pushing. And I am appealing to your sense of kindness. Rid me of the fellow, do. Half a dozen of your satellites and the 2 who are pacing up and down outside my house will be enough. Oh, while you're about it, go up to the 3rd floor and rope in my cook as well. She's the famous Victoire, you know, Master Lupin's old nurse. And, look here, one more tip, to show you how I love you. Send a squad of men to the Rue Chateaubriand, at the corner of the Rue Balzac. That's where our national hero lives, under the name of Michel Beaumont. Do you twig, old cockalorum? And now to business. Hustle." When D'Aubrec turned his head, Lupin was standing up, with clenched fists. His burst of admiration had not survived the rest of the speech and the revelations which D'Aubrec had made about Victoire and the flat in the Rue Chateaubriand. The humiliation was too great, and Lupin no longer bothered to play the part of the small general practitioner. He had but one idea in his head, not to give way to the tremendous fit of rage that was urging him to rush at D'Aubrec like a bull. D'Aubrec gave the sort of little cluck which, with him, did duty for a laugh. He came waddling up, with his hands in his trouser pockets, and said, incisively, "Don't you think that this is all for the best? I've cleared the ground, relieved the situation. At least, we now know where we stand. Lupin versus D'Aubrec, and that's all about it. Besides, think of the time saved. Dr. Vernes, the divisional surgeon, would have taken 2 hours to spin his yarn. Whereas, like this, Master Lupin will be compelled to get his little story told in 30 minutes, unless he wants to get himself collared and his accomplices nabbed. What a shock! What a bolt from the blue! 30 minutes and not a minute more. In 30 minutes from now, you'll have to clear out, scud away like a hare and beat a disordered retreat. Ha, ha, ha! What fun! I say, Polonius, you really are unlucky, each time you come up against B.B. D'Aubrec. For it was you who were hiding behind that curtain, wasn't it, my ill-starred Polonius?" Lupin did not stir a muscle. The one and only solution that would have calmed his feelings, that is to say, for him to throttle his adversary then and there, was so absurd that he preferred to accept D'Aubrec's jibes without attempting to retort, though each of them cut him like the lash of a whip. It was the second time, in the same room and in similar circumstances, that he had to bow before that D'Aubrec of misfortune and maintain the most ridiculous attitude in silence. And he felt convinced in his innermost being that, if he opened his mouth, it would be to spit words of anger and insult in his victor's face. What was the good? Was it not essential that he should keep cool and do the things which the new situation called for? "Well, M. Lupin, well," resumed the deputy, "you look as if your nose were out of joint. Come, console yourself and admit that one sometimes comes across a joker who's not quite such a mug as his fellows. So you thought that, because I wear spectacles and eyeglasses, I was blind? Bless my soul, I don't say that I at once suspected Lupin behind Polonius and Polonius behind the gentleman who came and bored me in the box at the vaudeville. No, no. But, all the same, it worried me. I could see that, between the police and MME Mergy, there was a third bounder trying to get a finger in the pie. And, gradually, what with the words let fall by the portress, what with watching the movements of my cook and making inquiries about her in the proper quarter, I began to understand. Then, the other night, came the lightning flash. I heard the row in the house, in spite of my being asleep. I managed to reconstruct the incident, to follow up MME Merge's traces, first to the Rue Chateaubriand and, afterward, to Saint-Germain. And then, what then? I put different facts together, the Enghien burglary, Gilbert's arrest, the inevitable treaty of alliance between the weeping mother and the leader of the gang, the old nurse installed as cook, all these people entering my house through the doors or through the windows. And I knew what I had to do. Master Lupin was sniffing at the secret. The scent of the 27 attracted him. I had only to wait for his visit. The hour has arrived. Good evening, Master Lupin. Dobreck paused. He had delivered his speech with the evident satisfaction of a man entitled to claim the appreciation of the most captious critics. As Lupin did not speak, he took out his watch. I say, only 23 minutes. How time flies. At this rate, we shan't have time to come to an explanation. And, stepping still closer to Lupin, I'm bound to say, I'm disappointed. I thought that Lupin was a different sort of gentleman. So, the moment he meets a more or less serious adversary, the Colossus falls to pieces. Poor young man, have a glass of water, to bring you round. Lupin did not utter a word, did not betray a gesture of irritation. With absolute composure, with a precision of movement that showed his perfect self-control and the clear plan of conduct which he had adopted, he gently pushed Dobreck aside, went to the table and, in his turn, took down the receiver of the telephone. I want 565.34, please, he said. He waited until he was through, and then, speaking in a slow voice and picking out every syllable, he said, Hello, Rue Chateaubriand. Is that you, Akil? Yes, it's the governor. Listen to me carefully, Akil. You must leave the flat. Hello. Yes, at once. The police are coming in a few minutes. No, don't lose your head. You've got time. Only, do what I tell you. Is your bag still packed? Good. And is one of the sides empty, as I told you? Good. Well, go to my bedroom and stand with your face to the chimneypiece. Press with your left hand on the little carved rosette in front of the marble slab, in the middle, and with your right hand on the top of the mantel shelf. You'll see a sort of drawer, with two little boxes in it. Be careful. One of them contains all our papers, the other, banknotes and jewelry. Put them both in the empty compartment of the bag. Take the bag in your hand and go as fast as you can, on foot, to the corner of the Avenue Victor Hugo and the Avenue de Montespan. You'll find a car waiting, with Victoire. I'll join you there. What? My clothes? My knickknacks? Never mind about all that. You be off. See you presently. Lupin quietly pushed away the telephone. Then, taking Dobreck by the arm, he made him sit in a chair by his side and said, And now listen to me, Dobreck. Oh, grinned the deputy. Calling each other by our surnames. Are we? Yes, said Lupin. I allowed you to. And, when Dobreck released his arm with a certain misgiving, he said, No, don't be afraid. We shan't come to blows. Neither of us has anything to gain by doing away with the other. A stab with a knife. What's the good? No, sir. Words, nothing but words. Words that strike home, though. Here are mine. They are plain and to the point. Answer me in the same way, without reflecting. That's far better. The boy. I have him. Give him back. MME Mergy will kill herself. No, she won't. I tell you she will. And I tell you she will not. But she's tried to. Once. That's just the reason why she won't try again. Well, then. Lupin, after a moment, went on. I expected that. Also, I thought, on my way here, that you would hardly tumble to the story of Dr. Verne's and that I should have to use other methods. Lupin's methods. As you say, I had made up my mind to throw off the mask. You pulled it off for me. Well done you. But that doesn't change my plans. Speak. Lupin took from a pocketbook a double sheet of foolscap paper, unfolded it and handed it to Dobreck, saying, "Here is an exact, detailed inventory, with consecutive numbers of the things removed by my friends and myself from your Villa Marie-Therese on the Lac d'Enghien. As you see, there are 113 items. Of those 113 items, 68, which have a red cross against them, have been sold and sent to America. The remainder, numbering 4 to 5, are in my possession until further orders. They happen to be the pick of the bunch. I offer you them in return for the immediate surrender of the child." Dobreck could not suppress a movement of surprise. "Oh," he said, "you seem very much bent upon it." "Infinitely," said Lupin, "for I am persuaded that a longer separation from her son will mean death to Mme Murgy. And that upsets you, does it, Lothario?" "What?" Lupin planted himself in front of the other and repeated, "What? What do you mean?" "Nothing. Nothing. Something that crossed my mind. Clarisse Murgy is a young woman still, and a pretty woman at that." Lupin shrugged his shoulders. "You brute," he mumbled. "You imagine that everybody is like yourself, heartless and pitiless. It takes your breath away. What? To think that a shark like me can waste his time playing the Don Quixote? And you wonder what dirty motive I can have? Don't try to find out. It's beyond your powers of perception. Answer me, instead. Do you accept?" "So you're serious?" asked Dobreck, who seemed but little disturbed by Lupin's contemptuous tone. "Absolutely. The 4 to 5 pieces are in a shed, of which I will give you the address, and they will be handed over to you, if you call there, at 9 o'clock this evening, with the child." There was no doubt about Dobreck's reply. To him, the kidnapping of little Jacques had represented only a means of working upon Clarisse Murgy's feelings, and perhaps also a warning for her to cease the contest upon which she had engaged. But the threat of a suicide must needs show Dobreck that he was on the wrong track. That being so, why refuse the favorable bargain which Arsène Lupin was now offering him? "I accept," he said. "Here's the address of my shed, 99, Rue Charles Laffit, Neuilly. You have only to ring the bell. And suppose I send Prasville, the Secretary-General, instead?" "If you send Prasville," Lupin declared, "the place is so arranged that I shall see him coming and that I shall have time to escape, after setting fire to the trusses of hay and straw which surround and conceal your credence tables, clocks, and Gothic virgins. But your shed will be burnt down. I don't mind that. The police have their eye on it already. I am leaving it in any case. And how am I to know that this is not a trap? Begin by receiving the goods and don't give up the child till afterward. I trust you, you see." "Good," said Dobreck. "You've foreseen everything. Very well. You shall have the nipper. The fair Clarisse shall live, and we will all be happy. And now, if I may give you a word of advice, it is to pack off as fast as you can." "Not yet." "Hey!" I said, "not yet." "But you're mad. Prasville's on his way. He can wait." "I've not done." "Why? What more do you want?" "Clarisse shall have her brat. Isn't that enough for you?" "Why not? There is another son. Gilbert." "Yes. Well, I want you to save Gilbert." "What are you saying?" "I save Gilbert." "You can, if you like. It only means taking a little trouble." Until that moment Dobreck had remained quite calm. He now suddenly blazed out and, striking the table with his fist, "No," he cried, "not that. Never. Don't reckon on me. No, that would be too idiotic." He walked up and down, in a state of intense excitement, with that queer step of his, which swayed him from right to left on each of his legs, like a wild beast, a heavy, clumsy bear. And, with a hoarse voice and distorted features, he shouted, "Let her come here. Let her come and beg for her son's pardon. But let her come unarmed, not with criminal intentions, like last time. Let her come as a supplicant, as a tamed woman, as a submissive woman who understands and accepts the situation." Gilbert? Gilbert's sentence? The scaffold? Why, that is where my strength lies. What? For more than 20 years have I awaited my hour. And, when that hour strikes, when fortune brings me this unhoped-for chance, when I am at last about to know the joy of a full revenge, and such a revenge, you think that I will give up the thing which I have been pursuing for 20 years? I save Gilbert? I. For nothing? For love? I, Dobreck. No, you can't have studied my features. He laughed, with a fierce and hateful laugh. Visibly, he saw before him, within reach of his hand, the prey which he had been hunting down so long. And Lupin also summoned up the vision of Clarice, as he had seen her several days before, fainting, already beaten, fatally conquered, because all the hostile powers were in league against her. He contained himself and said, "Listen to me." And, when Dobreck moved away impatiently, he took him by the two shoulders with that superhuman strength which Dobreck knew from having felt it in the box at the vaudeville, and, holding him motionless in his grip, he said, "One last word." "You're wasting your breath," growled the deputy. "One last word. Listen, Dobreck. Forget me Murgy. Give up all the nonsensical and imprudent acts which your pride and your passions are making you commit. Put all that on one side and think only of your interest." "My interest," said Dobreck, jestingly, "always coincides with my pride and with what you call my passions. Up to the present, perhaps, but not now that I have taken a hand in the business. That constitutes a new factor, which you choose to ignore. You are wrong. Gilbert is my pal. Gilbert is my chum. Gilbert has to be saved from the scaffold. Use your influence to that end, and I swear to you, do you hear? I swear that we will leave you in peace. Gilbert's safety, that's all I ask. You will have no more battles to wage with Mme Murgy, with me. There will be no more traps laid for you. You will be the master, free to act as you please. Gilbert's safety, Dobreck. If you refuse, what then? If you refuse, it will be war, relentless war. In other words, a certain defeat for you. Meaning thereby that I shall take the list of the 27 from you. Rot. You think so? Do you? I swear it. What Prasville and all his men, what Clarice Murgy, what nobody has been able to do, you think that you will do. I shall. And why? By favor of what saint will you succeed where everybody else has failed? There must be a reason. There is. What is it? My name is Arsène Lupin. He had let go of Dobreck, but held him for a time under the dominion of his authoritative glance and will. At last, Dobreck drew himself up, gave him a couple of sharp taps on the shoulder, and, with the same calm, the same intense obstinacy, said, "And my name's Dobreck. My whole life has been one desperate battle, one long series of catastrophes and routs in which I spent all my energies until victory came, complete, decisive, crushing, irrevocable victory. I have against me the police, the government, France, the world. What difference do you expect it to make to me if I have Arsène Lupin against me into the bargain? I will go further. The more numerous and skillful my enemies, the more cautiously I am obliged to play. And that is why, my dear sir, instead of having you arrested, as I might have done, yes, as I might have done and very easily, I let you remain at large and beg charitably to remind you that you must quit in less than 3 minutes. Then the answer is no. The answer is no. You won't do anything for Gilbert. Yes, I shall continue to do what I have been doing since his arrest. That is to say, to exercise indirect influence with the Minister of Justice, so that the trial may be hurried on and end in the way in which I want to see it end." "What?" cried Lupin, beside himself with indignation. "It's because of you. It's for you." "Yes, it's for me, Dobreck. Yes, by Jove. I have a trump card, the sun's head, and I am playing it. When I have procured a nice little death sentence for Gilbert, when the days go by and Gilbert's petition for a reprieve is rejected by my good offices, you shall see, Lupin, that his mummy will drop all her objections to calling herself Mimi Alexis Dobreck and giving me an unexceptionable pledge of her goodwill. That fortunate issue is inevitable, whether you like it or not. It is foredoomed. All I can do for you is to invite you to the wedding and the breakfast. Does that suit you? No. You persist in your sinister designs? Well, good luck. Lay your traps, spread your nets, rub up your weapons and grind away at the complete foreign post paper burglar's handbook. You'll need it. And now, good night. The rules of open-handed and disinterested hospitality demand that I should turn you out of doors. Hop it." Lupin remained silent for some time. With his eyes fixed on Dobreck, he seemed to be taking his adversary's size, gauging his weight, estimating his physical strength, discussing, in fine, in which exact part to attack him. Dobreck clenched his fists and worked out his plan of defense to meet the attack when it came. Half a minute passed. Lupin put his hand to his hip pocket. Dobrecht did the same and grasped the handle of his revolver. A few seconds more. Coolly, Lupin produced a little gold box of the kind that ladies use for holding sweets, opened it and handed it to Dobrecht. A lozenge? What's that? Asked the other, in surprise. Cough drops? What for? For the draft you're going to feel. And, taking advantage of the momentary fluster into which Dobrecht was thrown by his sally, he quickly took his hat and slipped away. Of course, he said, as he crossed the hall, I am knocked into fits. But all the same, that bit of commercial traveler's waggery was rather novel in the circumstances. To expect a pill and receive a cough drop is by way of being a sort of disappointment. It left the old chimpanzee quite flummoxed. As he closed the gate, a motorcar drove up and a man sprang out briskly, followed by several others. Lupin recognized Prasville. Monsieur le Secrétaire. General, he muttered. Your humble servant. I have an idea that, some day, fate will bring us face to face, and I am sorry, for your sake, for you do not inspire me with any particular esteem and you have a bad time before you, on that day. Meanwhile, if I were not in such a hurry, I should wait till you leave and I should follow Dobrecht to find out in whose charge he has placed the child whom he is going to hand back to me. But I am in a hurry. Besides, I can't tell that Dobrecht won't act by telephone. So let us not waste ourselves in vain efforts, but rather join Victoire, Achille, and our precious bag. 2 hours later, Lupin, after taking all his measures, was on the lookout in his shed at Neuilly and saw Dobrecht turn out of an adjoining street and walk along with a distrustful air. Lupin himself opened the double doors. Your things are in here, Monsieur le Depute, he said. You can go round and look. There is a jobmaster's yard next door. You have only to ask for a van and a few men. Where is the child? Dobrecht first inspected the articles and then took Lupin to the Avenue de Neuilly, where 2 closely veiled old ladies stood waiting with little Jacques. Lupin carried the child to his car, where Victoire was waiting for him. All this was done swiftly, without useless words and as though the parts had been got by heart and the various movements settled in advance, like so many stage entrances and exits. At 10 o'clock in the evening Lupin kept his promise and handed little Jacques to his mother. But the doctor had to be hurriedly called in, for the child, upset by all those happenings, showed great signs of excitement and terror. It was more than a fortnight before he was sufficiently recovered to bear the strain of the removal which Lupin considered necessary. Mme Murgy herself was only just fit to travel when the time came. The journey took place at night, with every possible precaution and under Lupin's escort. He took the mother and son to a little seaside place in Brittany and entrusted them to Victoire's care and vigilance. At last, he reflected, when he had seen them settled, there is no one between the Dobrecht bird and me. He can do nothing more to Mme Murgy and the kid, and she no longer runs the risk of diverting the struggle through her intervention. By Jingo, we have made blunders enough. First, I have had to disclose myself to Dobrecht. Secondly, I have had to surrender my share of the Enghien movables. True, I shall get those back, sooner or later, of that there is not the least doubt. But, all the same, we are not getting on, and, in a week from now, Gilbert and Vautrin will be up for trial. What Lupin felt most in the whole business was Dobrecht's revelation of the whereabouts of the flat. The police had entered his place in the Rue Chateaubriand. The identity of Lupin and Michel Beaumont had been recognized and certain papers discovered. And Lupin, while pursuing his aim, while, at the same time, managing various enterprises on which he had embarked, while avoiding the searches of the police, which were becoming more zealous and persistent than ever, had to set to work and reorganize his affairs throughout on a fresh basis. His rage with Dobrecht, therefore, increased in proportion to the worry which the deputy caused him. He had but one longing, to pocket him, as he put it, to have him at his bidding by fair means or foul, to extract his secret from him. He dreamt of tortures fit to unloose the tongue of the most silent of men. The boot, the rack, red-hot pincers, nailed planks, no form of suffering, he thought, was more than the enemy deserved, and the end to be attained justified every means. Oh, he said to himself, oh, for a decent bench of inquisitors and a couple of bold executioners. What a time we should have! Every afternoon the Growler and the Masher watched the road which Dobrecht took between the Square Lamartine, the Chamber of Deputies and his club. Their instructions were to choose the most deserted street and the most favorable moment and, one evening, to hustle him into a motorcar. Lupin, on his side, got ready an old building, standing in the middle of a large garden, not far from Paris, which presented all the necessary conditions of safety and isolation and which he called the monkey's cage. Unfortunately, d'Aubrec must have suspected something, for every time, so to speak, he changed his route, or took the underground or a tram, and the cage remained unoccupied. Lupin devised another plan. He sent to Marseilles for one of his associates, an elderly retired grocer called Brindebois, who happened to live in d'Aubrec's electoral district and interested himself in politics. Old Brindebois wrote to d'Aubrec from Marseilles, announcing his visit. D'Aubrec gave this important constituent a hearty welcome, and a dinner was arranged for the following week. The elector suggested a little restaurant on the left bank of the Seine, where the food, he said, was something wonderful. D'Aubrec accepted. This was what Lupin wanted. The proprietor of the restaurant was one of his friends. The attempt, which was to take place on the following Thursday, was this time bound to succeed. Meanwhile, on the Monday of the same week, the trial of Gilbert and Vautrin opened. The reader will remember, and the case took place too recently for me to recapitulate its details, the really incomprehensible partiality which the presiding judge showed in his cross-examination of Gilbert. The thing was noticed and severely criticized at the time. Lupin recognized d'Aubrec's hateful influence. The attitude observed by the two prisoners differed greatly. Vautrin was gloomy, silent, hard-faced. He cynically, in curt, sneering, almost defiant phrases, admitted the crimes of which he had formerly been guilty. But, with an inconsistency which puzzled everybody except Lupin, he denied any participation in the murder of Leonard the valet and violently accused Gilbert. His object, in thus linking his fate with Gilbert's, was to force Lupin to take identical measures for the rescue of both his accomplices. Gilbert, on the other hand, whose frank countenance and dreamy, melancholy eyes won every sympathy, was unable to protect himself against the traps laid for him by the judge or to counteract Vautrin's lies. He burst into tears, talked too much, or else did not talk when he should have talked. Moreover, his counsel, one of the leaders of the bar, was taken ill at the last moment. And here again Lupin saw the hand of d'Aubrec, and he was replaced by a junior who spoke badly, muddied the whole case, set the jury against him and failed to wipe out the impression produced by the speeches of the Advocate General and of Vautrin's counsel. Lupin, who had the inconceivable audacity to be present on the last day of the trial, the Thursday, had no doubt as to the result. A verdict of guilty was certain in both cases. It was certain because all the efforts of the prosecution, thus supporting Vautrin's tactics, had tended to link the two prisoners closely together. It was certain, also and above all, because it concerned two of Lupin's accomplices. From the opening of the inquiry before the magistrate until the delivery of the verdict, all the proceedings had been directed against Lupin, and this in spite of the fact that the prosecution, for want of sufficient evidence and also in order not to scatter its efforts over too wide an area, had decided not to include Lupin in the indictment. He was the adversary aimed at, the leader who must be punished in the person of his friends, the famous and popular scoundrel whose fascination in the eyes of the crowd must be destroyed for good and all. With Gilbert and Vautrin executed, Lupin's halo would fade away and the legend would be exploded. Lupin! Lupin! Arsène Lupin! It was the one name heard throughout the 4 days. The Advocate General, the presiding judge, the jury, the counsel, the witnesses had no other words on their lips. Every moment, Lupin was mentioned and cursed at, scoffed at, insulted and held responsible for all the crimes committed. It was as though Gilbert and Vautrin figured only as supernumeraries, while the real criminal undergoing trial was he, Lupin, Master Lupin, Lupin the burglar, the leader of a gang of thieves, the forger, the incendiary, the hardened offender, the ex-convict, Lupin the murderer, Lupin stained with the blood of his victim, Lupin lurking in the shade, like a coward, after sending his friends to the foot of the scaffold. "Oh, the rascals know what they are about," he muttered. "It's my debt which they are making my poor old Gilbert pay." And the terrible tragedy went on. At 7 o'clock in the evening, after a long deliberation, the jury returned to court and the foreman read out the answers to the questions put from the bench. The answer was, yes to every count of the indictment, a verdict of guilty without extenuating circumstances. The prisoners were brought in. Standing up, but staggering and white-faced, they received their sentence of death. And, amid the great, solemn silence, in which the anxiety of the onlookers was mingled with pity, the assize president asked, "Have you anything more to say, Voiture?" "Nothing, Monsieur le President. Now that my mate is sentenced as well as myself, I am easy. We are both on the same footing. The governor must find a way to save the two of us." "The governor?" "Yes, Arsène Lupin." There was a laugh among the crowd. The president asked, "And you, Gilbert?" Tears streamed down the poor lad's cheeks and he stammered a few inarticulate sentences. But, when the judge repeated his question, he succeeded in mastering himself and replied, in a trembling voice, "I wish to say, Monsieur le President, that I am guilty of many things, that's true. I have done a lot of harm. But, all the same, not this. No, I have not committed murder. I have never committed murder. And I don't want to die. It would be too horrible." He swayed from side to side, supported by the warders, and he was heard to cry, like a child calling for help, "Governor, save me! Save me! I don't want to die." Then, in the crowd, amid the general excitement, a voice rose above the surrounding clamor. "Don't be afraid, little UN. The governor's here." A tumult and hustling followed. The municipal guards and the policemen rushed into court and laid hold of a big, red-faced man, who was stated by his neighbors to be the author of that outburst and who struggled hand and foot. Questioned without delay, he gave his name, Philippe Bonal, an undertaker's man, and declared that someone sitting beside him had offered him 100-franc note if he would consent, at the proper moment, to shout a few words which his neighbor scribbled on a bit of paper. How could he refuse? In proof of his statements, he produced the 100-franc note and the scrap of paper. Philippe Bonal was let go. Meanwhile, Lupin, who of course had assisted energetically in the individual's arrest and handed him over to the guards, left the law courts, his heart heavy with anguish. His car was waiting for him on the quay. He flung himself into it, in despair, seized with so great a sorrow that he had to make an effort to restrain his tears. Gilbert's cry, his voice wrung with affliction, his distorted features, his tottering frame, all this haunted his brain, and he felt as if he would never, for a single second, forget those impressions. He drove home to the new place which he had selected among his different residences and which occupied a corner of the Place de Clichy. He expected to find the Growler and the Masher, with whom he was to kidnap Daubrecq that evening. But he had hardly opened the door of his flat when a cry escaped him. Clarice stood before him. Clarice, who had returned from Brittany at the moment of the verdict. He at once gathered from her attitude and her pallor that she knew. And, at once, recovering his courage in her presence, without giving her time to speak, he exclaimed, "Yes, yes, yes, but it doesn't matter. We foresaw that. We couldn't prevent it. What we have to do is to stop the mischief. And tonight, you understand, tonight, the thing will be done." Motionless and tragic in her sorrow, she stammered, "Tonight? Yes, I have prepared everything. In 2 hours, Daubrecq will be in my hands. Tonight, whatever means I have to employ, he shall speak." "Do you mean that?" she asked, faintly, while a ray of hope began to light up her face. "He shall speak. I shall have his secret. I shall tear the list of the 27 from him, and that list will set your son free." "Too late," Clarice murmured. "Too late? Why? Do you think that, in exchange for such a document, I shall not obtain Gilbert's pretended escape? Why, Gilbert will be at liberty in 3 days. In 3 days." He was interrupted by a ring at the bell. "Listen, here are our friends. Trust me. Remember that I keep my promises. I gave you back your little Zach. I shall give you back Gilbert." He went to let the Growler and the Masher in and said, "Is everything ready? Is old Brindabau at the restaurant? Quick, let us be off." "It's no use, Governor," replied the Masher. "No use? What do you mean?" "There's news." "What news? Speak, man." "Daubrecq has disappeared." "Aye, what's that? Daubrecq disappeared?" "Yes, carried off from his house, in broad daylight." "The devil! By whom?" "Nobody knows, 4 men, there were pistols fired. The police are on the spot. Prasville is directing the investigations." Lupin did not move a limb. He looked at Clarice Murgy, who lay huddled in a chair. He himself had to bow his head. Daubrecq carried off meant one more chance of success lost. Chapter 7. The Profile of Napoleon. Soon as the prefect of police, the chief of the criminal investigation department and the examining magistrates had left Dobrecht's house, after a preliminary and entirely fruitless inquiry, Prasville resumed his personal search. He was examining the study and the traces of the struggle which had taken place there when the portress brought him a visiting card, with a few words in pencil scribbled upon it. "Show the lady in," he said. "The lady has someone with her," said the portress. "Oh, well, show the other person in as well." Clarice Murgy entered at once and introduced a gentleman with her, a gentleman in a black frock coat, which was too tight for him and which looked as though it had not been brushed for ages. He was shy in his manner and seemed greatly embarrassed how to dispose of his old, rusty top hat, his gingham umbrella, his one and only glove, and his body generally. Nicole," said Clarice, "a private teacher, who is acting as tutor to my little Jacques. Nicole has been of the greatest help to me with his advice during the past year. He worked out the whole story of the crystal stopper. I should like him, as well as myself, if you see no objection to telling me, to know the details of this kidnapping business, which alarms me and upsets my plans. Yours too, I expect." Prasville had every confidence in Clarice Murgy. He knew her relentless hatred of Dobrecht and appreciated the assistance which she had rendered in the case. He therefore made no difficulties about telling her what he knew, thanks to certain clues and especially to the evidence of the portress. For that matter, the thing was exceedingly simple. Dobrecht, who had attended the trial of Gilbert and Vautrin as a witness and who was seen in court during the speeches, returned home at 6 o'clock. The portress affirmed that he came in alone and that there was nobody in the house at the time. Nevertheless, a few minutes later, she heard shouts, followed by the sound of a struggle and 2 pistol shots, and from her lodge she saw 4 masked men scuttle down the front steps, carrying Dobrecht the deputy, and hurry toward the gate. They opened the gate. At the same moment, a motor car arrived outside the house. The 4 men bundled themselves into it, and the motor car, which had hardly had time to stop, set off at full speed. "Were there not always 2 policemen on duty?" asked Clarice. "They were there," said Prasville, "but at 150 yards distance, and Dobrecht was carried off so quickly that they were unable to interfere, although they hastened up as fast as they could." "And did they discover nothing, find nothing?" "Nothing, or hardly anything. Merely this." "What is that?" "A little piece of ivory, which they picked up on the ground." There was a 5th party in the car, and the portress saw him get down while the others were hoisting Dobrecht in. As he was stepping back into the car, he dropped something and picked it up again at once. But the thing, whatever it was, must have been broken on the pavement, for this is the bit of ivory which my men found. "But how did the 4 men manage to enter the house?" asked Clarice. "By means of false keys, evidently, while the portress was doing her shopping in the course of the afternoon, and they had no difficulty in secreting themselves, as Dobrecht keeps no other servants. I have every reason to believe that they hid in the room next door, which is the dining room, and afterward attacked Dobrecht here, in the study. The disturbance of the furniture and other articles proves how violent the struggle was. We found a large-bore revolver, belonging to Dobrecht, on the carpet. One of the bullets had smashed the glass over the mantelpiece, as you see." Clarice turned to her companion for him to express an opinion. But Nicole, with his eyes obstinately lowered, had not budged from his chair and sat fumbling at the rim of his hat, as though he had not yet found a proper place for it. Prasville gave a smile. It was evident that he did not look upon Clarice's adviser as a man of first-rate intelligence. "The case is somewhat puzzling, monsieur," he said, "is it not?" Yes, Nicole confessed, "most puzzling." "Then you have no little theory of your own upon the matter?" "Well, monsieur le secrétaire general, I'm thinking that Dobrecht has many enemies." "Ah, capital. And that several of those enemies, who are interested in his disappearance, must have banded themselves against him." Capital, said Prasville, with satirical approval. "Capital. Everything is becoming clear as daylight. It only remains for you to furnish us with a little suggestion that will enable us to turn our search in the right direction. Don't you think, monsieur le secrétaire general, that this broken bit of ivory which was picked up on the ground—" "No, Nicole, no. That bit of ivory belongs to something which we do not know and which its owner will at once make it his business to conceal. In order to trace the owner, we should at least be able to define the nature of the thing itself. M. Nicole reflected and then began. Monsieur le Secrétaire General, when Napoleon I fell from power. Oh, M. Nicole. Oh, a lesson in French history. Only a sentence, Monsieur le Secrétaire General, just one sentence which I will ask your leave to complete. When Napoleon I fell from power, the Restoration placed a certain number of officers on half-pay. These officers were suspected by the authorities and kept under observation by the police. They remained faithful to the emperor's memory, and they contrived to reproduce the features of their idol on all sorts of objects of everyday use: snuff-boxes, rings, breastpins, penknives, and so on. Well, this bit comes from a walking stick, or rather a sort of loaded cane, or life-preserver, the knob of which is formed of a piece of carved ivory. When you look at the knob in a certain way, you end by seeing that the outline represents the profile of the little corporal. What you have in your hand, Monsieur le Secrétaire General, is a bit of the ivory knob at the top of a half-pay officer's life-preserver. Yes, said Prasville, examining the exhibit. Yes, I can make out a profile, but I don't see the inference. The inference is very simple. Among Daubrecq's victims, among those whose names are inscribed on the famous list, is a descendant of a Corsican family in Napoleon's service, which derived its wealth and title from the emperor and was afterward ruined under the Restoration. It is 10 to 1 that this descendant, who was the leader of the Bonapartist party a few years ago, was the fifth person hiding in the motor car. Need I state his name? The Marquis d'Albufex, said Prasville. The Marquis d'Albufex, said M. Nicole. M. Nicole, who no longer seemed in the least worried with his hat, his glove, and his umbrella, rose and said to Prasville, Monsieur le Secrétaire General, I might have kept my discovery to myself and not told you of it until after the final victory. That is, after bringing you the list of the 27. But matters are urgent. Daubrecq's disappearance, contrary to what his kidnappers expect, may hasten on the catastrophe which you wish to avert. We must therefore act with all speed. Monsieur le Secrétaire General, I ask for your immediate and practical assistance. In what way can I help you? Asked Prasville, who was beginning to be impressed by his quaint visitor. By giving me, tomorrow, those particulars about the Marquis d'Albufex which it would take me personally several days to collect. Prasville seemed to hesitate and turned his head toward Mme Murgy. Clarice said, I beg of you to accept M. Nicole's services. He is an invaluable and devoted ally. I will answer for him as I would for myself. What particulars do you require, monsieur? Asked Prasville. Everything that concerns the Marquis d'Albufex. The position of his family, the way in which he spends his time, his family connections, the properties which he owns in Paris and in the country. Prasville objected. After all, whether it's the Marquis or another, Daubrecq's kidnapper is working on our behalf, seeing that, by capturing the list, he disarms Daubrecq. And who says, Monsieur le Secrétaire General, that he is not working on his own behalf? That is not possible, as his name is on the list. And suppose he erases it? Suppose you then find yourself dealing with a second blackmailer, even more grasping and more powerful than the first, and one who, as a political adversary, is in a better position than Daubrecq to maintain the contest. The Secretary-General was struck by the argument. After a moment's thought, he said, Come and see me in my office at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I will give you the particulars. What is your address, in case I should want you? M. Nicole, 25, Place de Clichy. I am staying at a friend's flat, which he has lent me during his absence. The interview was at an end. M. Nicole thanked the Secretary-General with a very low bow and walked out, accompanied by Mme Murgy. That's an excellent piece of work, he said, outside, rubbing his hands. I can march into the police office whenever I like and set the whole lot to work. Mme Murgy, who was less hopefully inclined, said, Alas, will you be in time? What terrifies me is the thought that the list may be destroyed. Goodness gracious me, by whom? By Daubrecq? No, but by the Marquis, when he gets hold of it. He hasn't got it yet. Daubrecq will resist long enough, at any rate, for us to reach him. Just think, Prasville is at my orders. Suppose he discovers who you are? The least inquiry will prove that there is no such person as M. Nicole. But it will not prove that M. Nicole is the same person as Arsène Lupin. Besides, make yourself easy. Prasville is not only beneath contempt as a detective, He has but one aim in life, which is to destroy his old enemy, Dorbreck. To achieve that aim, all means are equally good, and he will not waste time in verifying the identity of A.M. Nicole who promises him Dorbreck. Not to mention that I was brought by you and that, when all is said, my little gifts did dazzle him to some extent. So let us go ahead boldly. Clarisse always recovered confidence in Lupin's presence. The future seemed less appalling to her, and she forced herself to admit, that the chances of saving Gilbert were not lessened by that hideous death sentence. But he could not prevail upon her to return to Brittany. She wanted to fight by his side. She wanted to be there and share all his hopes and all his disappointments. The next day the inquiries of the police confirmed what Prasville and Lupin already knew. The Marquis d'Albufex had been very deeply involved in the business of the canal, so deeply that Prince Napoleon was obliged to remove him from the management of his political campaign in France, and he kept up his very extravagant style of living only by dint of constant loans and makeshifts. On the other hand, in so far as concerned the kidnapping of Dorbreck, it was ascertained that, contrary to his usual custom, the Marquis had not appeared in his club between 6 and 7 that evening and had not dined at home. He did not come back until midnight, and then he came on foot. M. Nicole's accusation, therefore, was receiving an early proof. Unfortunately, and Lupin was no more successful in his own attempts. It was impossible to obtain the least clue as to the motorcar, the chauffeur, and the 4 people who had entered Dorbreck's house. Were they associates of the Marquis, compromised in the canal affair like himself? Were they men in his pay? Nobody knew. The whole search, consequently, had to be concentrated upon the Marquis and the country seats and houses which he might possess at a certain distance from Paris, a distance which, allowing for the average speed of a motorcar and the inevitable stoppages, could be put at 60 to 90 miles. Now d'Albufex, having sold everything that he ever had, possessed neither country houses nor landed estates. They turned their attention to the Marquis' relations and intimate friends. Was he able on this side to dispose of some safe retreat in which to imprison Dorbreck? The result was equally fruitless. And the days passed. And what days for Clarisse Mergy! Each of them brought Gilbert nearer to the terrible day of reckoning. Each of them meant 24 hours less from the date which Clarisse had instinctively fixed in her mind. And she said to Lupin, who was racked with the same anxiety, 55 days more. 50 days more. What can one do in so few days? Oh, I beg of you. I beg of you. What could they do indeed? Lupin, who would not leave the task of watching the Marquis to anyone but himself, practically lived without sleeping. But the Marquis had resumed his regular life, and, doubtless suspecting something, did not risk going away. Once alone, he went down to the Duc de Montmore's in the daytime. The Duke kept a pack of boarhounds, with which he hunted the forest of Dolane. D'Albufex maintained no relations with him outside the hunt. It is hardly likely, said Prasville, that the Duc de Montmore, an exceedingly wealthy man, who is interested only in his estates and his hunting and takes no part in politics, should lend himself to the illegal detention of Dorbreck the deputy in his chateau. Lupin agreed. But, as he did not wish to leave anything to chance, the next week, seeing d'Albufex go out one morning in riding dress, he followed him to the Gare du Nord and took the same train. He got out at Aumale, where d'Albufex found a carriage at the station which took him to the Chateau de Montmore. Lupin lunched quietly, hired a bicycle and came in view of the house at the moment when the guests were going into the park, in motorcars or mounted. The Marquis d'Albufex was one of the horsemen. Thrice, in the course of the day, Lupin saw him cantering along, and he found him, in the evening, at the station, where d'Albufex rode up, followed by a huntsman. The proof, therefore, was conclusive, and there was nothing suspicious on that side. Why did Lupin, nevertheless, resolve not to be satisfied with appearances? And why, next day, did he send the Masher to find out things in the neighborhood of Montmore? It was an additional precaution, based upon no logical reason, but agreeing with his methodical and careful manner of acting. 2 days later he received from the Masher, among other information of less importance, a list of the house party at Montmore and of all the servants and keepers. One name struck him, among those of the huntsmen. He at once wired, "Inquire about huntsman Sebastiani." The Masher's answer was received the next day. Sebastiani, a Corsican, was recommended to the Duc de Montmore by the Marquis d'Albufex. He lives at 2 or 3 miles from the house, in a hunting lodge built among the ruins of the feudal stronghold which was the cradle of the Montmort family. That's it, said Lupin to Clarice Murgy, showing her the Masher's letter. That name, Sebastiani, at once reminded me that d'Albufex is of Corsican descent. There was a connection. Then what do you intend to do? If D'Aubrec is imprisoned in those ruins, I intend to enter into communication with him. He will distrust you. No. Lately, acting on the information of the police, I ended by discovering the 2 old ladies who carried off your little Jacques at Saint-Germain and who brought him, the same evening, to Neuilly. They are 2 old maids, cousins of D'Aubrec, who makes them a small monthly allowance. I have been to call on those demoiselles Rousselot. Remember the name and the address, 134 bis, Rue du Bac. I inspired them with confidence, promised them to find their cousin and benefactor. And the elder sister, Euphrasie Rousselot, gave me a letter in which she begs D'Aubrec to trust M. Nicole entirely. So you see, I have taken every precaution. I shall leave tonight. You mean, said Clarice. You, can I go on living like this, in feverish inactions? And she whispered, I am no longer counting the days, the 38 or 40 days that remain to us. I am counting the hours. Lupin felt that her resolution was too strong for him to try to combat it. They both started at 5 o'clock in the morning, by motorcar. The Growler went with them. So as not to arouse suspicion, Lupin chose a large town as his headquarters. At Amiens, where he installed Clarice, he was only 18 miles from Montmort. At 8 o'clock he met the Masher not far from the old fortress, which was known in the neighborhood by the name of Morteper, and he examined the locality under his guidance. On the confines of the forest, the little river Ligia, which has dug itself a deep valley at this spot, forms a loop which is overhung by the enormous cliff of Morteper. Nothing to be done on this side, said Lupin. The cliff is steep, over 200 feet high, and the river hugs it all round. Not far away they found a bridge that led to the foot of a path which wound, through the oaks and pines, up to a little esplanade, where stood a massive, iron-bound gate, studded with nails and flanked on either side by a large tower. Is this where Sebastiani the huntsman lives? Asked Lupin. Yes, said the Masher, with his wife, in a lodge standing in the midst of the ruins. I also learnt that he has 3 tall sons and that all the 4 were supposed to be away for a holiday on the day when D'Aubrec was carried off. Oh, said Lupin. The coincidence is worth remembering. It seems likely enough that the business was done by those chaps and their father. Toward the end of the afternoon, Lupin availed himself of a breach to the right of the towers to scale the curtain. From there he was able to see the huntsman's lodge and the few remains of the old fortress. Here, a bit of wall, suggesting the mantle of a chimney. Further away, a water tank. On this side, the arches of a chapel. On the other, a heap of fallen stones. A patrol path edged the cliff in front, and, at one of the ends of this patrol path, there were the remains of a formidable donjon keep raised almost level with the ground. Lupin returned to Clarice Murgy in the evening, and from that time he went backward and forward between Amiens and Morteper, leaving the Growler and the Masher permanently on the watch. And 6 days passed. Sebastiani's habits seemed to be subject solely to the duties of his post. He used to go up to the Château de Montmort, walk about in the forest, note the tracks of the game and go his rounds at night. But, on the 7th day, learning that there was to be a meet and that a carriage had been sent to Ormel station in the morning, Lupin took up his post in a cluster of box and laurels which surrounded the little esplanade in front of the gate. At 2 o'clock he heard the pack give tongue. They approached, accompanied by hunting cries, and then drew farther away. He heard them again, about the middle of the afternoon, not quite so distinctly, and that was all. But suddenly, amid the silence, the sound of galloping horses reached his ears, and, a few minutes later, he saw 2 riders climbing the river path. He recognized the Marquis d'Albufex and Sebastiani. On reaching the esplanade, they both alighted, and a woman, the huntsman's wife, no doubt, opened the gate. Sebastiani fastened the horses' bridles to rings fixed on a post at a few yards from Lupin and ran to join the Marquis. The gate closed behind them. Lupin did not hesitate, and, though it was still broad daylight, relying upon the solitude of the place, he hoisted himself to the hollow of the breach. Passing his head through cautiously, he saw the 2 men and Sebastiani's wife hurrying toward the ruins of the keep. The huntsman drew aside a hanging screen of ivy and revealed the entrance to a stairway, which he went down, as did d'Albufex, leaving his wife on guard on the terrace. There was no question of going in after them, and Lupin returned to his hiding place. He did not wait long before the gate opened again. The Marquis d'Albufex seemed in a great rage. He was striking the leg of his boot with his whip and mumbling angry words which Lupin was able to distinguish when the distance became less great. "Ah, the hound! I'll make him speak. I'll come back tonight, at 10 o'clock. Do you hear, Sebastiani? And we shall do what's necessary." "Oh, the brute!" Sebastiani unfastened the horses. D'Albufex turned to the woman. "See that your sons keep a good watch. If anyone attempts to deliver him, so much the worse for him. The trapdoor is there. Can I rely upon them?" "As thoroughly as on myself, Monsieur le Marquis," declared the huntsman. "They know what Monsieur le Marquis has done for me and what he means to do for them. They will shrink at nothing." "Let us mount and get back to the hounds," said d'Albufex. So things were going as Lupin had supposed. During these runs, d'Albufex, taking a line of his own, would push off to Mortepier, without anybody's suspecting his trick. Sebastiani, who was devoted to him body and soul, for reasons connected with the past into which it was not worthwhile to inquire, accompanied him. And together they went to see the captive, who was closely watched by the huntsman's wife and his 3 sons. "That's where we stand," said Lupin to Clarice Murgy, when he joined her at a neighboring inn. "This evening the Marquis will put d'Aubrec to the question, a little brutally, but indispensably, as I intended to do myself. And d'Aubrec will give up his secret," said Clarice, already quite upset. "I'm afraid so." "Then, I am hesitating between 2 plans," said Lupin, who seemed very calm. "Either to prevent the interview." "How?" "By forestalling d'Albufex. At 9 o'clock, the Growler, the Masher and I climbed the ramparts, burst into the fortress, attacked the keep, disarmed the garrison, and the thing's done, d'Aubrec is ours. Unless Sebastiani's sons fling him through the trapdoor to which the Marquis alluded." "For that reason," said Lupin, "I intend to risk that violent measure only as a last resort and in case my other plan should not be practicable." "What is the other plan?" "To witness the interview. If d'Aubrec does not speak, it will give us the time to prepare to carry him off under more favorable conditions. If he speaks, if they compel him to reveal the place where the list of the 27 is hidden, I shall know the truth at the same time as d'Albufex, and I swear to God that I shall turn it to account before he does." Yes, said Clarice. "But how do you propose to be present?" "I don't know yet," Lupin confessed. "It depends on certain particulars which the Masher is to bring me and on some which I shall find out for myself." He left the inn and did not return until an hour later as night was falling. The Masher joined him. "Have you the little book?" asked Lupin. "Yes, Governor. It was what I saw at the Ormail newspaper shop. I got it for 10 sous. "Give it me." The Masher handed him an old, soiled, torn pamphlet, entitled, on the cover, "A Visit to Mortepier, 1824, with plans and illustrations." Lupin at once looked for the plan of the donjon keep. "That's it," he said. Above the ground were 3 stories, which have been raised, and below the ground, dug out of the rock, 2 stories, one of which was blocked up by the rubbish, while the other. That's where our friend d'Aubrec lies. The name is significant, the torture chamber. Poor, dear friend. Between the staircase and the torture chamber, 2 doors. Between those 2 doors, a recess in which the 3 brothers obviously sit, gun in hand. So it is impossible for you to get in that way without being seen. Impossible unless I come from above, by the story that has fallen in, and look for a means of entrance through the ceiling. But that is very risky." He continued to turn the pages of the book. Clarice asked, "Is there no window to the room?" "Yes," he said. "From below, from the river, I have just been there. You can see a little opening, which is also marked on the plan. But it is 50 yards up, sheer. And even then the rock overhangs the water. So that again is out of the question." He glanced through a few pages of the book. The title of one chapter struck him, "The Lovers' Towers." He read the opening lines. In the old days, the donjon was known to the people of the neighborhood as the Lovers' Tower, in memory of a fatal tragedy that marked it in the Middle Ages. The Comte de Mortepier, having received proofs of his wife's faithlessness, imprisoned her in the torture chamber, where she spent 20 years. One night, her lover, the Sire de Tancarville, with reckless courage, set up a ladder in the river and then clambered up the face of the cliff till he came to the window of the room. After filing the bars, he succeeded in releasing the woman he loved and bringing her down with him by means of a rope. They both reached the top of the ladder, which was watched by his friends, when a shot was fired from the patrol path and hit the man in the shoulder. The two lovers were hurled into space. There was a pause after he had read this, a long pause during which each of them drew a mental picture of the tragic escape. So, 3 or 4 centuries earlier, a man, risking his life, had attempted that surprising feat and would have succeeded but for the vigilance of some sentry who heard the noise. A man had ventured. A man had dared. A man done it. Lupin raised his eyes to Clarice. She was looking at him, with such a desperate, such a beseeching look. The look of a mother who demanded the impossible and who would have sacrificed anything to save her son. "Masha," he said, "get a strong rope, but very slender, so that I can roll it round my waist, and very long, 50 or 60 yards. You, Growler, go and look for 3 or 4 ladders and fasten them end to end." "Why, what are you thinking of, Governor?" cried the 2 accomplices. "What, you mean to? But it's madness." "Madness? Why? What another has done I can do. But it's 100 chances to 1 that you break your neck." "Well, you see, Masha, there's 1 chance that I don't." "But, Governor, that's enough. My friends, meet me in an hour on the riverbank." The preparations took long in the making. It was difficult to find the material for a 50-foot ladder that would reach the first ledge of the cliff, and it required an endless effort and care to join the different sections. At last, a little after 9 o'clock, it was set up in the middle of the river and held in position by a boat, the bows of which were wedged between 2 of the rungs, while the stern was rammed into the bank. The road through the river valley was little used, and nobody came to interrupt the work. The night was dark, the sky heavy with moveless clouds. Lupin gave the Masher and the Growler their final instructions and said, with a laugh, "I can't tell you how amused I am at the thought of seeing Dorbrek's face when they proceed to take his scalp or slice his skin into ribbons. Upon my word, it's worth the journey." Clarice also had taken a seat in the boat. He said to her, "Until we meet again. And, above all, don't stir. Whatever happens, not a movement, not a cry." "Can anything happen?" she asked. "Why, remember the Sire de Tancarville." It was at the very moment when he was achieving his object, with his true love in his arms, that an accident betrayed him. "But be easy. I shall be all right." She made no reply. She seized his hand and grasped it warmly between her own. He put his foot on the ladder and made sure that it did not sway too much. Then he went up. He soon reached the top rung. This was where the dangerous ascent began, a difficult ascent at the start, because of the excessive steepness, and developing, midway, into an absolute escalade. Fortunately, here and there were little hollows, in which his feet found a resting place, and projecting stones, to which his hands clung. But twice those stones gave way and he slipped, and twice he firmly believed that all was lost. Finding a deeper hollow, he took a rest. He was worn out, felt quite ready to throw up the enterprise, asked himself if it was really worthwhile for him to expose himself to such danger. "I say," he thought, "seems to me you're showing the white feather. Lupin, old boy. Throw up the enterprise. Then Dorbrek will babble his secret. The Marquis will possess himself of the list. Lupin will return empty-handed, and Gilbert." The long rope which he had fastened round his waist caused him needless inconvenience and fatigue. He fixed one of the ends to the strap of his trousers and let the rope uncoil all the way down the ascent, so that he could use it, on returning, as a handrail. Then he once more clutched at the rough surface of the cliff and continued the climb, with bruised nails and bleeding fingers. At every moment he expected the inevitable fall. And what discouraged him most was to hear the murmur of voices rising from the boat, murmur so distinct that it seemed as though he were not increasing the distance between his companions and himself. And he remembered the Sire de Tancarville, alone, he too, amid the darkness, who must have shivered at the noise of the stones which he loosened and sent bounding down the cliff. How the least sound reverberated through the silence. If one of Dorbrek's guards was peering into the gloom from the Lover's Tower, it meant a shot and death. And he climbed. He had climbed so long that he ended by imagining that the goal was past. Beyond a doubt, he had slanted unawares to the right or left and he would finish at the patrol path. What a stupid upshot! And what other upshot could there be to an attempt which the swift force of events had not allowed him to study and prepare? Madly, he redoubled his efforts, raised himself by a number of yards, slipped, recovered the lost ground, clutched a bunch of roots that came loose in his hand, slipped once more and was abandoning the game in despair when, suddenly, stiffening himself and contracting his whole frame, his muscles and his will, he stopped still. A sound of voices seemed to issue from the very rock which he was grasping. He listened. It came from the right. Turning his head, he thought that he saw a ray of light penetrating the darkness of space. By what effort of energy, by what imperceptible movements he succeeded in dragging himself to the spot he was never able exactly to realize. But suddenly he found himself on the ledge of a fairly wide opening, at least 3 yards deep, which dug into the wall of the cliff like a passage, while its other end, much narrower, was closed by 3 bars. Lupin crawled along. His head reached the bars, and he saw. And that concludes part 1 of The Crystal Stopper by Maurice Leblanc. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling adventure with Arsène Lupin. Be sure to watch part 2, where the story unfolds with more twists, surprises, and excitement you won't want to miss. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like the video to show your support. Share it with friends who love classic mysteries. Leave a comment below. What do you think of the story so far? And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when part 2 is available. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in part 2 of The Crystal Stopper. Until then, happy listening.